Welcome back to Harry's Verse. Today's story asks a dangerous question. What if Harry Potter buried his trust in Dumbledore and rose to burn it all down? If you haven't yet, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a single story never slips past you. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Shape of the Cage. Number 4, Privet Drive kept its clocks the way a jailer keeps keys. Harry Potter had learned to read the house by its sounds long before he learned to read anything else. The tick in the hall, the groan of the third stair. Vernon's throat clearing itself into the morning like an engine that resented being started. For most of his life, those sounds had meant danger or drudgery, and he had answered them the way small animals answer weather, by going still and waiting for the sky to change. He was not going still now. He sat at the desk in the smallest bedroom with the window open on a night that smelled of cut grass and warm tar, and he did not wait for anything. He counted. 2 withdrawals a year for 11 years. That was the number he had been turning over since the letter came, and it would not stop turning. 2 withdrawals a year from a vault he had never been told existed, authorized by signature that was not his and had never needed to be. The letter from Gringotts lay flat under his hand, its parchment heavier than paper had any right to be, its ink the deep iron color goblins used when they meant a thing to last. He had read it 4 times. He had stopped needing to read it. The sentences had moved into him and made themselves at home. Mr. Potter. It has come to the attention of the Iron Ledger that certain instruments pertaining to the House of Potter and the estate of the late Sirius Orion Black require your attention as the presumptive heir. We are obliged to inform you that decisions taken on your behalf during your minority may be subject to your review upon your majority. Your attendance is requested at your earliest convenience. Nothing in it accused anyone of anything. Goblins did not accuse, they invoiced. But an invoice read closely is a map of who owes what to whom, and Harry had begun reading everything closely in the 4 weeks since the Department of Mysteries, because reading closely was the only thing left that his hands could do without shaking. Sirius was dead. He made himself say it as he made himself do press-ups in the dark, as a discipline, because the alternative was letting the fact wait for him in ambush at odd hours. Sirius was dead, and the man who had sent Sirius into that room by degrees, by half-truths, by a year of doors left closed and questions left unanswered, had knelt in front of him in a ruined office and wept about love. Harry had sat in that office and let the old man talk. He remembered the shape of the words more than the words themselves. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth. I owed you the truth and I withheld it. Forgive an old man. He remembered thinking even through the roar in his skull that it had been a beautifully built speech, every stone of it laid true, every apology a load-bearing wall. He had forgiven that night. Or he had said the shapes that forgiveness makes, because he had been 16 and hollowed out, and there had been a hand on his shoulder that felt, for one treacherous minute, like the only warm thing in England. He was not 16 tonight in any way that counted. He would be 17 in 3 days, and the letter under his hand had a sentence in it that the old man's speech had never once approached. Decisions taken on your behalf during your minority. Whose decisions? That was the question the goblins were too polite to answer and too precise to leave out. Harry lifted the letter to the candle and read the seal again, the crossed pick and coin pressed into wax the color of dried blood. Then he set it down and did the thing he had been teaching himself to do all summer, the thing Snape had failed to beat into him in a year of contempt, because contempt is a poor teacher and loss, it turned out, was a superb one. He closed his eyes and went quiet inside. Clumency, the books called it, in the 2 volumes he had lifted from the Black Library the week the Order finally led him back to Grimmauld Place for a night. Snape had described it as clearing the mind, which Harry now understood was either a lie or the incompetence of a man who could do a thing without knowing how he did it. You did not clear the mind, you organized it, you built rooms. You decided what lived where and who was allowed to walk the halls. The grief did not vanish when he went quiet. It went into a room he had made for it, a room with a heavy door, and he stood outside that door and felt the cold of it against his back and used the cold. Cold was useful, cold could count. When he opened his eyes, the shaking in his hands was gone. It would come back. He had made peace with the coming back. But for the length of a held breath, he was only a mind doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic said, someone had been spending Potter gold for 11 years, someone with the legal standing to do it, and no one had told him he had gold at all until he was old enough to ask. He knew who. He had known who before he opened the letter. The knowing had simply not had anywhere to live until now. Mrs. Fig's cats watched him leave the next morning the way they always did, from windowsills and fence posts in the black mouth of the gap under her hedge, and for the first time Harry did not think of them as a comfort. He thought reports. He thought about how a woman with no magic to speak of had been settled 2 streets from a wizard child for a decade, and how convenient that was, and how nobody arranges convenience by accident. He walked past her house with his hands in his pockets and did not wave, and he felt her cats turn their heads to track him, and he catalogued it. He had told the Order he was going to Mrs. Fig's. It was the sort of lie that would survive contact, because Tonks was on the day watch and Tonks trusted him and disliked lying to him, which made her easy to lie to. He walked to the end of Wisteria Walk, checked the street the way Moody had taught him without ever meaning to teach him a skill this useful, and put out his wand hand. The night bus arrived the way a rockslide arrives, all at once and violently, and Stan Shunpike leaned out of the door already talking. Harry paid, took a seat near the back, and did not offer his name. Underage magic, the trace, the whole apparatus of surveillance that the ministry pretended was for his protection. He had thought about all of it in the small hours and concluded that the night bus was, for exactly this reason, perfect. It went where he pointed. It did not report to Dumbledore. And a boy riding a public conveyance was doing nothing the law could touch. He watched London assemble itself out of the smear of magical transit. Somewhere behind him, an hour behind at least, an order member would notice he had not knocked on Mrs. Figg's door, and there would be a flurry, and Dumbledore would be told, and Dumbledore would be— Harry considered the word carefully, concerned. He turned the word over and found he did not believe it anymore, and the not believing was a clean feeling, like the moment a splinter finally comes out. The leaky cauldron let him through without a second glance because he had pulled his fringe down over the scar, and because Tom the innkeeper had learned long ago that some customers preferred not to be recognized. Diagon Alley on a weekday morning was thin, nervous, the war's early frost already on it. Shops that had been open last summer had brown paper in their windows now. A ministry poster peeled from a wall, its printed face of some accused fugitive curling away as if the wall itself wanted no part of the accusation. Gringotts rose white and crooked at the top of the alley, its bronze doors thrown wide, its warning still cut into the silver inner arch about thieves and what the vaults keep for them. Harry read the whole of it this time slowly, the way you read a thing you intend to remember. For those who take but do not earn. He had spent his whole life being told, gently and firmly and by kind faces, what he had not earned: his place in the world, his safety, the right to know his own history. Every gift the wizarding world had ever handed him had come with a lien on it, a quiet clause, and only now had he begun to read the small print. The teller who took his request was old, his fingers long and clever, his eyes flat as coins. Harry gave his name and asked for the account manager of the House of Potter, and something moved behind the flat eyes, a small recalculation. "You wish to speak with the manager of the estate," the goblin said. It was not a question. Goblins did not waste question marks. "I received a letter," Harry said. "It said decisions were taken on my behalf. I'd like to know what they were, who made them, and what it will cost to undo them." The recalculation finished. The goblin set down his quill. "That," he said, "is the correct order of questions. Follow me." The office they gave him was deep in the bank where the marble went cold and the torches burned without smoke. Goblin named Ragnarok sat behind a desk built for someone twice his height, and the desk was covered edge to edge in ledgers, and every ledger was open, and Harry understood without being told that this was theater, that the ledgers had been laid out for him, that goblins conducted their most important business the way generals conduct surrenders, with the terms visible on the table. "Herr Potter," Ragnarok said, "you have reached your majority. In 3 days. In 3 days you may act, today you may know. The distinction matters to your account and to your temper, so I mark it." Ragnarok folded his hands. "You asked the teller 3 questions. I will answer them in the reverse of the order you gave, because the cost is the answer you least want and most need." Harry sat. He kept his hands loose on his knees. Inside, in the organized dark, he stood outside the heavy door he kept shut and put his palm flat against it and felt it push back, and he held it and he listened. "The cost of undoing what was done," Ragnarok said, "is nothing in gold. The instruments used against your interests were legal. That is the first thing you must understand, Herr Potter, and the hardest. No crime was committed against you. Everything done to you was done within the law by a man the law recognized as entitled to do it." He turned one ledger a quarter turn so the columns faced Harry. "You were made a ward of the wizarding world upon the death of your parents. A magical guardian was appointed. This is ordinary. Orphans require guardians. The appointment was made by the chief warlock of the Wisengamot in his capacity as chief warlock and countersigned by the office of the Minister for Magic. The appointment named the guardian as one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." Harry had known the name would be there. Knowing had not prepared him for the weight of it in ink, in a goblin's careful mouth, in the smokeless torchlight. He said nothing. "A magical guardian," Ragnarok continued, "may access the ward's trust vault for the ward's maintenance, education, and welfare. Withdrawals were made 2 a year for 11 years of a sum I will show you, dispersed by the guardian's authority." He turned another ledger. "The stated purpose in each case is the same: ward maintenance." "I was raised by muggles," Harry said. His voice came out level, which pleased him distantly, the way you are pleased by a tool that holds an edge. "They were paid to keep me." "No," Ragnarok's flat eyes did not blink. "That is the second thing you must understand. The disbursements did not go to the Dursley household. We have no record of a single nut reaching them. The withdrawals were made and the gold went elsewhere. The purpose recorded is maintenance. The maintenance was not performed. What was performed, Herr Potter, is not written in this ledger, because we record where gold goes only when it enters another vault we hold. This gold did not. It left the bank as coin and became, from our side of the counter, invisible." Harry looked at the number. It was not a fortune, taken year by year. Taken across 11 years, it was a house, a life, a comfortable existence that had been drawn against his name and had never once landed on his back or in his belly. He thought of the cupboard under the stairs. He thought of the 2 big clothes and the broken glasses mended with tape and the birthdays that arrived like any other Tuesday. He did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic did not require the heavy door to open. The arithmetic was colder than what waited behind it, and it lasted longer. "You said 3 questions," Harry said. "Who made the decisions? You've answered that. What were they? You've started. There's more than the withdrawals." "There is more than the withdrawals." Ragnar drew a single folded parchment from beneath the ledgers and set it in the exact center of the desk, equidistant from them both, a thing offered rather than surrendered. There is a will. The torches did not gutter, nothing in the room did anything dramatic. But Harry felt the floor of the last month tilt very slightly, the way a ship tilts when the cargo shifts below, and he understood that whatever was written on that parchment was the keel of the whole thing. My parents' will. The last testament of James Fleamont Potter and Lily Potter née Evans, executed with counsel, witnessed, and sealed 1 month before their deaths. Ragnar did not push the parchment closer. It was read into the record at Gringotts, as all such instruments are, and then it was sealed by order of the chief warlock of the Wisengamot on grounds of the ward's security within a week of the deaths. It has remained sealed for 15 years. You are the first person entitled to break that seal who has ever asked to see it. No one asked, Herr Potter. In 15 years no one asked. Read it to me. You may read it yourself, but I will tell you the clause you came here to find, because you will not find your temper in the whereas and the hereby. Ragnar's voice did not soften because goblins did not soften, but it slowed, and the slowing was its own kind of respect. Your parents named guardians for you in the event of their deaths. They named 5 in order of preference. The first was your godfather, Sirius Orion Black. The second was Alice and Frank Longbottom jointly. The third was Remus John Lupin with a provision for the war and his condition. The fourth was Minerva McGonagall. The fifth was Amelia Susan Bones. He let the names stand in the cold air one at a time, and each one landed like a coin dropped on marble. There is a clause below the fifth name, Herr Potter, and it is written in your mother's hand, and the witnesses attest it. It reads, under no circumstances is Harry to be placed with Petunia Dursley and her husband. We do not consent to this. We have never consented to this. If every name above is unavailable, we would sooner he be raised by the order or the school than by my sister. Silence has textures. This one was smooth and very cold, and Harry lived in it for the length of several heartbeats, and he did not let the door open, though the thing behind it threw its whole weight against the wood. Sirius, he said when he could make the word come out flat. Sirius was first, and Sirius spent that year in Azkaban with no trial. With no trial, Ragnar agreed, which is its own ledger and a longer one. But mark the sequence, Herr Potter, because you strike me as someone who has begun to mark sequences. The godfather is imprisoned without trial and cannot take the child. The Longbottoms are tortured to madness within the month and cannot take the child. The werewolf is set aside for the war and his condition. The witch and the law officer are never approached. And the one placement the parents forbade in the mother's own hand, the one arrangement they crossed out and wrote never beside, is the one that is made within a week by the man who sealed the will that forbade it. He set his long fingers together into a steeple. I am a keeper of ledgers. I do not tell my clients what their numbers mean. I only ensure the numbers are true. These are true. What they mean you will decide. Harry looked at the will in the center of the desk. He did not reach for it yet. He found that he wanted, more than he had wanted anything in a month, not to touch it while his hands were the hands of a boy who might shake. So he sat and he breathed, and in the organized dark he walked the halls of himself, and he did not open the heavy door, and he did not open the heavier one beside it. He opened instead a door he had built that summer and had not yet had cause to use, a plain room with nothing in it but a table, and he laid the whole of it down on the table one piece at a time and looked at it the way Ragnar looked at ledgers. The godfather removed, the forbidden placement made, the gold drawn and vanished, the muggle informant 2 streets over, the sealed history, the year of closed doors, the prophecy withheld until withholding it had cost a life. And over all of it, laid across all of it like a hand pressed flat on a map, one signature, one name, one old man who had knelt on a ruined floor and wept about love. He had spent a month telling himself there was an explanation, that there was always an explanation, that Dumbledore was wise, that Dumbledore was good, that the doors had been closed for reasons Harry was too young to be trusted with. He had wanted the explanation the way you want a bridge to hold. He wanted it now, sitting in the cold with the ledgers open. He reached for it one last time, honestly, the way you test a bridge before you trust your weight to it. The explanation did not hold. It had never held. He had been standing on it out of habit, and habit, it turned out, is not a bridge. It is only the memory of one. Something in him did not break because it had already broken in the Department of Mysteries and had been breaking by degrees ever since. What happened in Ragnar's office was quieter than breaking and more permanent. He took the trust he had carried his whole life, the trust in the wise old man who would come and fix things, who knew best, who loved him. He took it up in both hands, and he did not smash it, because smashing is loud and he was done being loud. He carried it to the plainest room in himself, and he laid it down on the ground, and he covered it over, the way you cover over a thing you are done with, and he did not weep at the grave of it, because it was not a person, it was a leash. He had simply mistaken the leash for a hand for a very long time. He looked up. Ragnar was watching him with the flat coin eyes, and there was, in the way the torchlight sat in them, something that might in a human have been the beginning of interest. I'd like 3 things, Harry said, and his voice had changed, and he heard it change, and he did not mind. I want the will copied, certified, and kept where he can't reach it. I want a full accounting of every instrument he holds over the House of Potter, guardianships, proxies, keys, anything with his name on it. And I want to know what it takes when I'm of age in 3 days to revoke all of it in a single afternoon so quietly that he doesn't learn it's gone until he tries to use it. The interest in Ragnar's eyes finished becoming interest. He unrolled a fresh sheet of the iron-colored parchment and dipped his quill. The first is done before you leave the bank, he said. The second will take a week and a fee, and the fee is fair, and I will not cheat you because a client who has just learned the cost of being cheated is not a client one cheats twice. The third. He wrote a line and read it back. The third is the interesting one, Air Potter, and I will give you its answer for nothing because I would like to see what you do with it. On your 17th birthday, at the instant of your majority, the magical guardianship dissolves by operation of law. It requires no petition and no hearing. It simply ends. Every proxy exercise in your name lapses at the same instant unless you renew it. He does not have to be told. He does not have to consent. The leash, as you called it. I heard you call it nothing, but your face called it a leash. The leash is not cut, it rots on a schedule, and the schedule is 3 days out. Harry looked at the wool in the center of the desk. This time he reached out and took it, and his hand was steady, and he read his mother's writing where she had crossed out her own sister's name and written never beside it, and he found that the steadiness held. Then in 3 days, he said, I'd like to be here when it rots. I will keep the morning open, said Ragnarok. He did not go back to Privet Drive by the night bus. He went to Grimmauld Place because he had decided on the marble stairs of Gringotts that he needed to see the house again, and because a thought had arrived in Ragnarok's office and had not left, and the thought was this. The will named Sirius first, and Sirius was dead, and Sirius had a will of his own, and Harry had never been told a single word about it. Number 12 appeared between 11 and 13 the way it always did, unfolding out of the wall like a card sliding out of a deck, and Harry stood on the pavement across the road and looked at it for a while before he crossed. The Order used it now. Dumbledore had installed the Order, and at the moment Sirius could no longer object, and the installing had been done with the same gentle certainty as everything else, the certainty of a man who had never in his life had to ask whether a house was his to lend. It had been Sirius's, before that it had been the Blacks'. It had never at any point been Dumbledore's, and yet the Fidelius on it named Dumbledore as secret keeper, which meant that the house Sirius had hated and inherited and finally opened only for Harry's sake could not be entered, could not be found, could not be approached except by the grace of the man who had put Sirius in it and then let him rot there for a year like gold drawn against a name. Harry crossed the road. The door knew him. The Black Wards had always known him, had known him since Sirius named him family in front of them, and that was a thread he tucked away to pull on later, and the door opened before his hand touched it, and the hall beyond was dim and smelled of dust and old smoke, and the particular staleness of a house full of people who sleep with one ear open. Kreacher was in the hall. The house elf had been polishing the same square foot of banister for what looked like an hour, muttering, and when he saw Harry his ancient face folded into its usual sneer, and then something happened that had never happened before. The sneer stopped halfway. Kreacher looked at Harry and looked at the banister and looked back at Harry, and his enormous eyes went wet and wide. The blood of the house, Kreacher whispered. Kreacher feels it, the house feels it. Master is dead, poor master, wicked ungrateful master, but the house has a new, the house knows. He stopped, his long fingers knotted in the filthy rag he wore. Does the young one know, he said in a different voice, a sly one, an old one, what he's standing in? Harry crouched slowly so that his eyes were level with the elf's, and he did not do it the way Hermione would have out of kindness, and he did not do it the way Sirius had out of contempt. He did it the way Ragnarok laid out ledgers so that the terms were visible on the table. I think I'm standing in my house, Harry said quietly. Sirius made me family in front of the Wards. He had no other heir the Wards would take. That makes it mine when I'm of age, whatever Will says or doesn't say. Am I right, Kreacher? You know, you've served this house longer than anyone alive. The elf made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, the sound of something that has been waiting a very long time for the right person to ask the right question. Yes, Kreacher breathed. Yes, the young one is right. The house knows its blood. The house was only loaned to the old thief with the twinkling eyes. Loan, not given, never given. The secret cannot be kept from the house's own master when the master is of age and claims it. Kreacher could not say. Kreacher was ordered not to say. But the young one asked, and asking is not the same as being told, oh no, and Kreacher has been so very careful about the difference. Who ordered you not to say? Kreacher's mouth worked. He could not say that either. Harry saw not directly the order held. But the elf lifted one trembling hand and pointed, very deliberately, at a portrait on the wall, not the shrieking portrait of Walburga Black behind its curtains, but a dim watercolor beside it, a landscape innocuous, the kind of thing no one looked at twice. And Harry looked at it twice and then a third time and saw that the frame was newer than the wall, and that the wood of it did not match the wood of any other frame in the house, and that a very faint warmth came off it, the warmth of a listening charm, a thing put there to hear. He straightened up. He did not look at the watercolor again. He looked instead at the umbrella stand made from a troll's leg, and he said, in a voice pitched for anyone who might be listening through cheap enchanted watercolors, I only came to collect a few of Sirius's things before term, just some books. He'd have wanted me to have his books. And Kreacher, who was old and cruel and had spent a lifetime learning how to lie to people he despised, understood at once, and produced a wet theatrical wail about the young master's things in the wicked blood trader's library, and shuffled off toward the drawing-room making enough noise for two. Harry followed. And when the door of the drawing-room was shut behind them, and Kreacher had, without being asked, pressed his palm to the doorframe and murmured something that made the air go momentarily thick, And then flat and dead and private, Harry sat down in Sirius's chair in his own house, in the one room in England he was now nearly certain no one could hear, and he began for the first time to make a list. The list was not written down. Written things could be summoned, copied, read by portraits, extracted by legilimency from the mind of a house elf who could be compelled. Harry kept the list where Ragnarok kept the true numbers and where Clumency kept the loss in a room he had built, and he added to it item by careful item through the long afternoon while the Order's watch changed somewhere above him and no one knew he was in the house at all. Item. The guardianship dissolves in 3 days and its lapse is silent and everything hung from it lapses with it. Item. The will names Sirius, then 4 others, then forbids the Dursleys in his mother's hand, and it was sealed by the one man it inconvenienced. Item. The gold was drawn and did not arrive for 11 years, and the man who drew it wept about love in a broken office and did not mention the vault. Item. The house is his by blood and was loaned to the Order by a man who did not own it, and the Fidelius can be broken by the house's true master. And Creature, old spiteful, betrayed himself once by a member of this very family and never forgiven for surviving it. Creature will help, because Creature has spent 15 years waiting for someone to ask him the right question instead of ordering him to shut up. Item. There is a listening charm in the hall disguised as a watercolor, which means the man who installed the Order in this house did not trust the people he installed here, which means the Order is not a brotherhood. It is a network of assets, and assets can be turned, and a man who spies on his own allies has taught them, without meaning to, exactly how little they owe him. He sat with that last one for a while. It was, he thought, the most useful thing he had learned all day, more useful even than the will, because the will told him what had been done and the watercolor told him how it had been done, and more than that, how it could be undone. Dumbledore did not rule the Order the way a king rules, by love and loyalty freely given. He ruled it as he had ruled Harry, by managing what each person knew, and when they knew it, by being the only one who could see the whole board. Take away the whole board view, hand a piece of it quietly to the right person at the right time, and the whole structure did not fall. It simply stopped being his. Harry understood, sitting in his dead godfather's chair, that he had been thinking about this wrong all summer. He had been imagining a confrontation, a scene. Himself and the old man across a desk, and the truth flung down between them like a gauntlet, and the satisfaction of watching that kind face finally drop its warmth. He had wanted that scene the way you want to shout in a dream and find you have no voice. He did not want it anymore. A confrontation was a gift you gave your enemy. It told him what you knew, showed him the shape of your knowing, let him begin in the same breath to build the wall that answered it. Dumbledore was better at confrontations than anyone alive. He had knelt and wept, and Harry had forgiven him. That was what the old man did to people who confronted him. He turned the confrontation inside out and came away holding the other person's heart. No, there would be no scene. There would be nothing the old man could see coming, because the whole of Dumbledore's power was that he saw everything coming, and the only move Harry had that the old man had never once had to counter was the move of a person Dumbledore believed he already understood. Dumbledore believed he understood Harry. That was the flaw in the whole design, and it was a beautiful flaw, and Harry turned it over in the private dark and felt something that was not quite the loss and not quite the heat behind the heavy door, something new that had been assembling itself all afternoon out of ledgers and wills and a listening watercolor. He would let the old man go on believing it. He would be to every eye that watched him, to Mrs. Figg's cats in the Order's watch and the twinkling portraits and the man himself, exactly the grieving air they expected, compliant, a little sullen the way loss is sullen, slow to recover. He would write the letters they wanted to read and take the trains they wanted him on and sit in the classes and nod at the wisdom. And all the while underneath, in rooms no legilimens would ever be invited into, he would take the design apart the way you take apart a watch, one jeweled pin at a time, and he would not raise his voice once. And by the time Dumbledore reached for a lever and found it gone, there would be no lever left to reach for. Creature was watching him from the hearth rug with his wet, enormous eyes. The young one has a face, the elf said, like old Master Regulus had at the end when Regulus stopped flinching. He said the name the way other people say a prayer, and Harry marked it Regulus and set it on the table in the plain room with everything else, because Creature had loved someone in this house once and that someone had died with his flinching behind him, and there was a thread there too, though Harry could not yet see where it led. Creature, Harry said. I'm going to ask you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Serve the Order, mutter, be a nuisance, let them think nothing has changed. He leaned forward. And once a week when the house is empty, you and I are going to talk about the family, about the house, about everything you were ordered not to say to people who never thought to ask. Would you do that? Not as an order. I won't order you, I'm asking. The house elf's face did the folding thing again, the sneer that failed to complete, and this time what replaced it was so naked that Harry looked away out of something like courtesy. When Creature spoke, his voice had gone very old and very steady. Creature will talk to the master of the house, he said. Creature has so much to say. Creature has been keeping it for years and years, waiting. He bowed low the way Harry had never once seen him bow to anyone, and when he straightened there was iron in him that had not been there an hour before. The young one is going to burn down the old thief's whole world, Creature said with terrible satisfaction. Creature can smell it, like the family in the good days. Creature will fetch the tea. He was back at Privet Drive before the watch changed, before the flurry could become a crisis, and he let himself be seen coming up Wisteria Walk from the direction of Mrs. Figg's so that the report would write itself as he wanted it read. the grieving heir out for a walk, home before dark, no trouble. Tonks was on the evening shift. She waved from behind a parked car with her hair the color of a bruise, and Harry lifted a hand and gave her the tired half-smile the part called for, and it cost him nothing, and it should have cost him more, and he marked even that and set it on the table with the rest. In the smallest bedroom, he lit the candle again and took out the letter from Gringotts and held it to the flame until the wax seal softened. And then he did not burn it, because burning it would leave ash, and ash could be read by the right charm, and he was done leaving anything to be read. He folded it into the false bottom of the loose floorboard where he had once hidden birthday cakes and stolen food, the hollow under the boards that had kept his few secret things safe from the Dursleys for a decade, because the Dursleys had never once imagined he might have secrets worth hiding. The hollow had been dug by a child hoarding scraps against hunger. It would serve now for something else. He sat back against the bed and looked at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like a country that did not exist, and he took stock of the day the way Ragnarok took stock of a vault. He had walked into Gringotts believing there might be an innocent explanation, and he had walked out knowing there was not, and the knowing had not destroyed him, which was the thing he kept returning to, turning it over, testing it for cracks. He had thought the truth would be a blow that flattened him. Instead, the truth was a floor. For the first time in longer than he could measure, he was standing on something that would not tilt when the cargo shifted, because he had stopped standing on the memory of a bridge and started standing on facts, and facts, however ugly, hold your weight. He was not going to be the weapon the old man had raised him to be. He understood that now with the clarity of arithmetic. Every piece of his life had been arranged. The cupboard, the Dursleys, the closed doors, the withheld prophecy, the loneliness that made him grateful for scraps of warmth, all of it arranged the way you arrange the making of a tool. A boy who has known nothing but neglect will follow the first hand that seems kind straight into any fire it points him at. That was the design, that was what the ledger meant under the whereas and the hereby. He had been made grateful on purpose so that he would spend the gratitude on cue. He was done spending it. Candle guttered. Down the hall, Vernon's snores started up like the engine finally turning over. In 3 days the guardianship would rot on schedule, and a goblin would keep the morning open, and a house elf would fetch the tea, and somewhere in a circular office full of whirring silver instruments an old man with a phoenix and a twinkling eye would go on believing, because it had always been true and he had no reason to imagine it might stop being true, that he understood the child from the cupboard perfectly. Harry closed his eyes and went quiet inside into the organized dark and walked the halls of the house he was building in himself. Past the heavy door shut, past the heavier one beside it shut tighter, into the plain room with the table where the whole design lay spread out under a cold, clean light, every pin and jewel of it waiting. He looked at it for a long time. Then, one piece at a time, he began to decide the order in which it would come apart. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the ledger. At the stroke of midnight, the house changed temperature. Harry felt it the way you feel a tide go out, a pressure that had always been there withdrawing so completely that its absence became the loudest thing in the room. The blood wards. He had read about them in one of the black volumes and pieced the rest together from what the Order let slip when they thought he was sleeping. A protection anchored in his mother's sacrifice and renewed each summer by his return to her sister's roof, a charm Dumbledore had wrought and Dumbledore alone could tend. It had kept him safe. It had also kept him here, pinned to Privet Drive every June like a specimen to a card, and the two functions had been so neatly braided together that no one had ever needed to ask which one mattered more to the man who tied the knot. Now the braid came undone. 17 years to the minute from his birth, the magic that had made him a ward of the world let go of him all at once, and the house on Privet Drive became, from a wizard's view, an ordinary house full of sleeping muggles defended by nothing but its locks. He was already dressed. His trunk was already shrunk to the size of a matchbox in his pocket, packed in the dark over 3 careful nights so that no single evening's activity would look like leaving. Hedwig had been sent ahead to Grimmauld with a note tied to her leg that said only soon. He stood in the smallest bedroom and listened to the tide of the wards finish going out, and then he opened the window not to climb through it, but because he wanted the last thing he did in that house to be an act of his own choosing rather than one the house permitted him. He walked down the stairs. He did not skip the third one. It groaned under him and no one woke, and he understood that he had spent a decade avoiding that stair out of a habit of smallness he no longer owed anyone. He let himself out the front door and left it unlocked behind him, and he did not look back at the darkened windows because the people behind them had never once looked for him. The night bus took him to the mouth of Diagon Alley in the gray before dawn. He waited on the step of the shuttered apothecary until the bank's bronze doors were drawn back, and then he walked up the empty alley alone, and the first person to greet him on the morning he came of age was a goblin who bowed exactly 1 degree lower than he had bowed 3 days before. "Herr Potter," said Ragnarok, "or in an hour if the tests run true, something with a good deal more weight to it. Come, the morning is kept as promised." The chamber they used for inheritance was round and windowless and older than the marble halls above it. Its walls the raw stone the goblins had cut when they first tunneled beneath the city, before there was a city. A basin stood at its center on a plinth of black rock, wide and shallow, filled with a liquid that held light the way still water holds the moon, silver over dark. Around the rim ran a script Harry could not read, and he did not ask what it said because Ragnarok had the look of a creature about to explain everything necessary and nothing more. You will cut your hand, Ragnar said, with this. He laid a short blade of pale metal on the plinth. 7 drops, no fewer, or the reckoning is incomplete. No more, or the reckoning is greedy and shows you lines you have no living claim to. 7. Then you speak your name, the whole of it, and you wait, and the ledger of your blood writes itself where the water can hold it. Goblins do not guess at lineage, Herr Potter. We do not accept a man's word for what he is. Gold has been killed over less than a false name. This is how we know. Harry took up the blade. He drew it across the meat of his palm, and the pain was clean and quick, and he counted 7 drops into the silver and watched each one bloom red and then vanish as the liquid took it. Then he said his name, all of it, the name his parents had chosen before a wand was ever pointed at his cradle. Harry James Potter. The basin did not flare or thunder. It did something quieter and far more unsettling. The silver went dark, utterly dark, and then rising through the darkness the way constellations rise through a clearing sky, lines of pale fire began to write themselves across the surface. A tree. Names branching from names, some bright, most guttering to embers where a line had died, and at the base of the trunk burning steadily his own. Ragnar leaned over the basin and read it the way a man reads a document he has been waiting a long career to be handed. House of Potter, he said, direct and undisputed, the last of the male line which you knew. The seat in the Wisengamot descends to you at your majority, which is now. His finger moved, not touching the surface, tracing a branch that ran back and back through the fire until it reached a knot of 3 names bound together so tightly they had half fused. And here, older than Potter, much older, thought extinct these several centuries. The blood is thin, but the water does not lie about thin blood, only about false blood. He looked up, and there was something in the flat coin eyes that had not been there before, an alertness, a keeper of ledgers who has found a line he did not expect to find. House of Peveril, Herr Potter, through the Potters, who were the last to carry it and forgot they carried it. There is no seat attached, the house predates the Wisengamot itself, but there is a name, and names of that age have a gravity of their own, and there are those in the world who would go very still if they heard it spoken beside yours. I would advise you not to speak it beside yours, not yet, not until you understand why they would go still. Harry looked at the 3 fused names at the root of the old branch and did not ask. He had learned in 3 days the value of the question held back. He set Peveril on the table in the plain room in his mind, beside Regulus, beside the listening watercolor, and he let it wait. He noticed, though, the way Ragnar had said the name. Goblins did not waste words, and they did not waste warnings, and a keeper of ledgers who advised a client not to speak a thing aloud was a keeper of ledgers telling that client the thing had teeth. 3 names, fused at the root of a line thought extinct. A house older than the Wisengamot, older than the school, older than the laws that governed both. There was a shape to it he could not yet see, a weight the water had shown him and Ragnar had refused to name. And Harry had learned to trust exactly that sensation, the sense of a large thing moving under still water, because it had been the sense that led him to the will and the vault and the truth. Whatever Peveril meant, it was going to matter, and it was going to matter in the way that inheritances always mattered to him, which was to say that someone had known and had chosen not to tell him and had counted on his ignorance the way a man counts on the dark. In the third, Ragnar said, and his finger moved to a branch that burned beside the Potter line rather than beneath it, joined not by blood but by a thread of light that pulsed like something recently made. This one is not the water's doing, this one is a man's doing, and the man is dead, and the doing was the last free act of his life. He straightened. The estate of Sirius Orion Black, he named you his heir, Herr Potter, formally witnessed, filed with us and beyond the reach of the ministry's meddling, because Sirius Black, whatever his failings, was a Black, and a Black knows that the only will worth writing is one no one can unwrite. You are the heir of the noble and most ancient house of Black. And that house holds 3 seats in the Wisengamot, and they have sat empty and voiceless for 15 years while their lord rotted in Azkaban, and they are yours. The fire in the basin held its shape, 4 seats, 1 from Potter, 3 from Black. 4 votes in a body of 50 that had, for as long as Harry had been alive, been marshaled and steered and quietly counted by a chief warlock who had also happened to be the heir's magical guardian, and who had therefore held, without anyone in that chamber quite noticing, the heir's future votes in his own 2 hands. He voted them, Harry said. It was not a question. He had stopped needing question marks himself. The Potter seat. Dumbledore held it in proxy while I was a minor. He voted it. Ragnar inclined his head. As magical guardian, he held the proxy of the Potter seat from the night of your parents' deaths. He voted it in every session of the Wisengamot for 15 years. The record is public if one knows to ask for it, and no one ever asks. He voted it, Herr Potter, for measures I will not characterize because I am a banker and not a politician, but which you may read at your leisure, and which you may find describe a consistent hand. The goblin's mouth did something that on a human face would have been the ghost of a smile, and on his was merely a rearrangement of contempt. At midnight the proxy lapsed with the guardianship. As of this morning, the chief warlock of the Wisengamot has 1 fewer vote in his pocket than he had yesterday and does not yet know it, because the votes of a 17-year-old are of no interest to anyone until the 17-year-old walks into the chamber and casts them himself. Then let's make sure he keeps not knowing it as long as possible, Harry said. What do I sign? There was a great deal to sign, and Ragnar had prepared all of it, and Harry read every word before he touched the quill, because he had promised himself in the cold of the first meeting that he would never again put his name to a thing he had not read, having spent his life bound by documents he had never been shown. He revoked first every proxy. Not by naming Dumbledore, which would have created a record with a name in it that clerks gossip over, but by the simpler and quieter instrument of declaring as the newly confirmed Lord of Three Houses that all proxies previously exercised in the names of Potter and Black were dissolved at his majority and none renewed. It was true on its face. It named no one. It would appear in no summary. And it removed, in a single clause, the legal fiction under which an old man's hand had moved 4 votes for 15 years. He sealed his vault's second with goblin wards keyed to his blood and his blood alone, and closed the maintenance authorizations that no longer had a guardian to draw on them, and requested a full statement of the 11 years of vanished withdrawals to be prepared and held, not published, because a thing held is leverage and a thing published is merely a scandal, and scandals passed and leverage did not. He addressed third the matter of Grimmauld Place, and here Ragnarok set down his quill and looked at him with the alertness again. The house, Harry said. It's mine now through Sirius. The Fidelius on it names Dumbledore as secret keeper. I want to know 2 things. Can the true owner of a property under Fidelius reclaim the secret, and if he can he do it in a way the current keeper does not feel? He can reclaim it, Ragnarok said slowly. Ownership is older magic than the Fidelius, and the Fidelius was raised over a house that already had a master, which means it was always a tenant's charm laid on a landlord's ground. You may take the secret back into yourself, but you asked the harder question, and I respect the question, so I will give you the harder answer. A secret keeper feels the secret leave him the way a man feels a tooth pulled. It is not subtle. Dumbledore will know the instant it is done that the house is no longer his to give, and he will know it was you who did it, because there is no one else it could be. Harry considered this. The floor of the plain room in his mind held it up without tilting. Then I won't take it back yet, he said. Not until the house is worth more to me than his not knowing. For now he can go on thinking he holds the door, but I want the mechanism ready, Ragnarok. I want it so that when I decide it takes an afternoon and not a month. Prepare it, hold it, and add one thing. He looked at the goblin steadily. If Albus Dumbledore or anyone acting on his authority attempts to alter, extend, or transfer the Fidelius on my property, I want to be told the same hour, not the same day, the hour. Ragnarok wrote it down, and when he had finished he looked at the line he had written and then at Harry, and he said, in the tone of a professional noting a professional matter, You are 17 this morning. Since midnight. I have managed the affairs of wizards 4 times your age who could not have sat through this hour without weeping or shouting or demanding I do something rash they would regret by supper. You have done neither. The coin eyes held him. I make no comment, I only mark it. Goblins mark everything. It is how we know. Mark this too then, Harry said, standing, flexing the hand that had healed clean where the pale blade had cut it. I'm going to need a great deal from this bank in the months to come, and I intend to pay for all of it in gold and in the one thing goblins value that gold cannot buy, which is a client who does not lie to you and does not ask you to lie for him. I know what your people were promised in the last war and what those promises turned to. I'm not going to make you promises. I'm going to make you a client worth keeping. That's better than a promise. Promises are what men give when they mean to owe you nothing. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment, then he bowed, and this time it was 2 degrees lower, and Harry understood that he had bought something in that windowless room that would not appear on any statement. There was one thing more, and Harry asked for it last because he had wanted the practical matters settled while his hands were steady, and this thing was not practical. It was the shape of the enemy. The Wisengamot record, he said. You said it was public if a man knew to ask. I'm asking 15 years of it, every measure where the chief warlock's hand showed. Ragnarok did not fetch it himself. He struck a bronze bell, and a younger goblin brought a bound volume the length of Harry's forearm. Its spine cracked from a use that was clearly not frequent, and laid it on the desk and withdrew. Public records, Harry understood, were public the way the warning over the vaults was public, available to anyone, read by almost no one, which came to the same thing as secret and cost nothing to maintain. He read for the better part of an hour. Ragnarok led him and did not narrate and did not editorialize, and the not editorializing was itself a kind of instruction, because it forced Harry to see the pattern for himself rather than be handed a conclusion he might later doubt. The pattern was there, it did not hide. It only required someone to lay the years side by side, and no one ever laid the years side by side because the Wisengamot voted in the present tense and the present tense forgets. Measure after measure the same hand. The registry of proscribed arts expanded 4 times in 15 years, each expansion moving another branch of magic across the line from taught to forbidden, and each expansion argued for on the record by the chief warlock on grounds of public safety and the protection of the young. Mind arts, wardcraft of the old blood-anchored kind. Rituals of inheritance and binding that the ancient houses had used for 1,000 years, reclassified in a single afternoon's vote as dark and struck from every syllabus in Britain, so that a generation grew up unable to do the magic their grandparents had done and unable even to name what they had lost. Harry thought of the 2 volumes he had lifted from the Black Library, the occlumency he had taught himself out of books that would be contraband if the shelves they came from were ever inspected. He thought of Snape failing to teach him the one art that might have saved Sirius, and he wondered coldly whether Snape had failed or whether Snape had been forbidden to succeed by a syllabus the same man wrote. There was more. Emergency powers voted to the office of the chief warlock during the First War and never rescinded when the war ended. The steady starvation of any school or tutor that might teach outside Hogwarts, so that there was one gate and one gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper decided what a child of magic was permitted to know. Creature legislation that pressed the goblins and the werewolves and the house elves each a little further down every decade, always gently, always for their own protection or the protection of others, always leaving them a little more dependent and a little less able to stand on their own. And over all of it, in the margins where the volume recorded who had spoken for a measure and who against, the same 3 or 4 names in favor, and again, one name that had not needed to speak because the measure was already his, laid quietly before a chamber that trusted him, passed by a body he had spent a lifetime teaching to trust him. Harry closed the volume. He had come to Gringotts thinking of a man. A single old man who had wronged a single boy, drawn his gold, sealed his will, left a door open in his mind. He had wanted on some floor of himself below the cold, clean rooms to make it personal, because personal was simple and simple was survivable. You could hate a man, you could plan against a man. The volume had shown him something worse than a man and better because it could be taken apart. Dumbledore had not merely wronged him, Dumbledore had built a world. A world in which knowledge ran through one gate and safety was indistinguishable from control, and every creature and every child and every ancient house had been made by kind, reasonable votes across 50 patient years, a little more dependent on the wisdom of one man who alone could see the whole board. Harry had been raised in miniature exactly as Britain had been raised at scale, kept ignorant for his safety, made grateful for scraps. Taught that the walls were for his protection and that the man who built them loved him. The design in his own life and the design in the bound volume were the same design, drawn once small and once large by the same hand, and the largeness of it did not frighten him the way it should have. It clarified him. You could take the man, Ragnarok said, the first words he had spoken in an hour, watching Harry's face with the alert coin eyes. It has been tried. Men have gone at Albus Dumbledore directly for 60 years. Grindelwald was the last who was any good at it, and Grindelwald sits in a tower he built himself, defeated by that hand, and the world calls it the greatest duel of the age. I would not advise the direct road, Herr Potter, if you were minded to ask my advice, which you have not. I'm not going to take the man, Harry said. He set his palm flat on the closed volume. A man is load-bearing until you take away the thing he's holding up. Then he's just an old man in a chair. I'm going to take apart what he built, one vote and one law and one turned ally at a time, quietly, so that by the time he reaches for the machine to defend himself, there's no machine left to reach for, and then he can stand in an empty chamber and be as wise as he likes. He lifted his hand from the volume. Keep this for me, certified, sealed, held. There's a season coming when I'll want to lay the years side by side in a room full of people who've never once done it, and I'll want the record in a goblin's certified hand so no one can call it a forgery. It will be waiting, Ragnarok said, and struck the bronze bell for the clerk, and if a goblin could be said to look forward to a thing, Ragnarok looked forward to that season. Grimmauld Place received him as its master. He felt the difference the instant he crossed the threshold, a settling, a recognition, the old dark house folding around him the way a hound folds around the return of the one person in the world it has decided is its own. Creature was waiting in the hall, and this time there was no half-formed sneer at all. The elf bowed low and stayed low until Harry told him to rise, and when he rose his eyes were dry and fierce. The house is the master's now, Creature said. Creature felt it in the night. The old thief still holds the secret, the wicked twinkling thief, but the ground beneath the secret is the master's, and the ground remembers, oh yes, the ground was always ours. He darted a look at the wall where the innocuous watercolor hung listening. The master will want the drawing room, he said loudly, theatrically, for the benefit of the frame. Creature will bring the master's things and the master's tea, and the master will grieve for poor dead master Sirius in peace as is proper. In the drawing room, with the door shut and Creature's palm pressed to the frame and the air gone flat in private, Harry sat where he had sat 3 days before and did the thing he had come to do, the thing he had been building toward through the whole of the cold, clean morning. He went into his own mind, and he went looking for the door that was not his. He had known for a long time that the scar was not merely a scar. He had felt Voldemort through it, rage and glee, and once, terribly, the shape of the thing that wore Quirrell like a coat. He had been made to relive the murder of an old man in a snake's body and had woken screaming, and he had walked into the Department of Mysteries because a vision had been planted in him like a seed in soft ground, and the seed had grown a trap and Sirius had died in it. All of that he had known. What he had not let himself know, because knowing it required a courage that loss had only recently taught him, was what the connection actually was. He built the halls of himself and walked them slowly past the heavy door and the heavier one into the deeper dark where the occlumency book said a mind kept the things it had not chosen to keep. And there at the far end where the scar's roots ran, he found it, a door that did not match the others. He had built every door in the house of himself. He knew the grain of each one. This one he had not built. It was set into the wall at an angle no architect would choose, older than the wall around it, as though the wall had grown up around a thing already there. And it was not locked. It had never been locked. It stood very slightly open, the way a door stands open when someone on the other side wants to be able to come and go, and from the gap came a thread of something cold and attentive that was not Harry and had never been Harry, a sliver of wool lodged in him like a splinter of glass grown over by the flesh it wounded. He did not touch it. He had the sense, standing before it in the dark of his own head, that touching it now without understanding it would be exactly the mistake the whole of his life had been arranged to make him make. Instead, he did what he had learned to do with the morning and the heat behind the heavy door. He observed. He noted the angle of it, the cold thread, the way it stood ajar. And he noted the single fact that reorganized everything he thought he knew, the fact that arrived quietly and did not leave. The door opened both ways. Voldemort had used it to reach him. The visions, the borrowed rage, the planted trap. But a door that opens both ways can be walked through in both directions, and Harry had, without ever being taught, without ever being told the door existed, occasionally felt things from the far side that no one had sent him on purpose, which meant the connection was not a weapon Voldemort had built. It was an accident of some kind, a wound that had knit two things together that should never have touched, and it was a wound that could be studied and worked, and one day when he understood it closed, and Dumbledore knew about it. Harry sat in the flat private air of the drawing room with his eyes shut and turned that over until its every face had caught the light. Dumbledore had taught him nothing about the connection. Dumbledore had arranged occlumency lessons with the one teacher guaranteed to make him fail, and when the lessons failed and the door stood open and the trap came through it, Dumbledore had wept about love in a broken office and had still, even then, even weeping, told him almost nothing about the thing living behind his eyes. A man who knew that a boy had an open door in his mind, an unlocked passage a dark lord could walk through, and who chose not to help him close it, had made a choice. There were only two reasons for that choice. Either Dumbledore did not know how to close it, which was possible, the man was old and not omniscient, or Dumbledore did not want it closed because the open door served some purpose in a design that Harry was only beginning to read. He thought about the prophecy, neither can live while the other survives. He thought about a boy raised in a cupboard, made grateful for scraps, taught to run toward the first warm hand, and about a door in that boy's mind that a Dark Lord could reach through, and about a design in which the child and the Dark Lord were bound so tightly that the end of one required the end of the other. And he thought, if I were building a weapon meant to be spent, I would not close the door either. I would leave it open. I would keep the two things tied together. I would raise the child to walk toward the fire, and I would make certain the fire could always find him, and when the time came I would tell him, gently, kindly, weeping if necessary, that the walking toward the fire was his destiny and his sacrifice and the greatest gift he could give. Harry opened his eyes. Creature was watching him from the hearthrug. The master looks, Creature said, like Master Regulus looked when Master Regulus worked out what the locket was. Harry turned his head. What locket? And the elf, who had been ordered 15 years ago never to speak of it and who had been waiting 15 years for someone to ask instead of order, opened his mouth and shut it, and his whole body shook with the fight between the old order and the new master, and at last he whispered, next week. The master said once a week. Creature will keep the locket for next week because the locket is a long story and a terrible one, and the master has a visitor coming, and Creature can smell the visitor on the wind. He wrung his hands. The old thief is coming to see how his weapon grieves. The master must let Creature put the privateer away and open the door and be the mournful, biddable heir the thief wants. Please, for next week, Creature promises, the whole terrible story. Harry stood and set Locket on the table beside Peveril and Regulus, and let the private heir go, and became, between one breath and the next, exactly the person Albus Dumbledore was coming to find. Dumbledore arrived at Grimmauld Place an hour after noon, and the house let him in because he still held the secret, and Harry met him in the hall with red-rimmed eyes and slumped shoulders and the particular stillness of someone holding himself together by main force, and none of it was faked exactly, which was what made it work. The morning was real. Harry simply stood in front of the door and let the old man look at it and kept the rest of the house dark. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was gentle and his blue eyes were kind, and he looked older than he had in the ruined office, genuinely older, the hand on his wand arm blackened at the fingertips beneath the glove Harry was not supposed to notice. I confess I was alarmed when Nymphadora reported you had left Privet Drive in the night. You gave the order a difficult morning. I'm sorry, Harry said and let his voice crack on it. I couldn't stay there, not after I couldn't, I came here. I thought here would be all right. It was Sirius's, I thought it would be all right. Something moved in the old man's face, and Harry, watching from behind the grieving surface with the cold, clean part of himself that never slept now, saw it land exactly where he had aimed it. Guilt. Dumbledore felt guilt about Sirius, real guilt, and the guilt made him want to be gentle with him, and gentleness made him careless, and Harry had just spent his one hard truth of the conversation to buy that carelessness. It was Sirius's, I thought it would be all right. 9 words that reminded the old man of his own failure and asked for nothing and therefore disarmed the whole approach he had surely planned on the walk here. Of course, Dumbledore said, of course you did. He did not come closer, he was too skilled to crowd. But his eyes rested on Harry's face, and Harry felt the faint, courteous pressure of the old man's attention against the surface of his mind, a knock so light it could be denied afterward as no knock at all, and Harry let the door of the morning swing open just wide enough to show him the room behind it and nothing else. Sirius falling through the veil, the office, the weeping. Real memories, true memories, arranged like a display in a shop window, everything Dumbledore expected to find, sitting exactly where he expected to find it, so that the finding of them would satisfy the search and end it. The pressure withdrew. Harry felt it go as he had felt the wards go at midnight, and he understood that he had just done, silently in the front hall of his own house, a thing that no one had believed he could do, that Snape had sworn he could not do, that Dumbledore himself did not imagine he could do. He had let the most accomplished legilimens in Britain into the front room of his mind and out again, and the man had left believing he had seen the whole house. The blood protections at Privet Drive have ended, Dumbledore said, folding his hands. You know this, you are a clever young man and you will have felt it. It means I am afraid that number 4 is no longer the safest place in England for you as it was for so long. I had hoped you might spend these last weeks of summer somewhere I could keep you close. The Burrow, perhaps, the Weasleys would be glad of you and there are protections I can raise there. Somewhere I could keep you close. Harry heard the whole of the old design breathing under the kind words, the same braid, safety and control wounds so tight you could not pull them apart. Keep the weapon close. Keep it warm and grateful and surrounded by love so that when the time came to spend it, it would go willingly because willing sacrifice was worth so much more than the other kind. I'd like that, Harry said and made himself mean it on the surface and meant something entirely different underneath. The Burrow. Ron's been writing. It'd be good to not be alone. He let his voice thin out. But could I have a few days here first, on my own? I know it's not safe, I know, but it's his and I haven't. I need to sit in his house for a few days before I can be around people being cheerful at me. Is that all right? A week. Then I'll come to the Burrow and I'll stay wherever you tell me to stay. He watched the old man weigh it. He watched the guilt press its thumb on the scale. And he watched Dumbledore decide that a grieving boy asking for a week alone in his dead godfather's house was the most natural and harmless request in the world, and that refusing it would cost trust the old man could not afford to spend, and that a week changed nothing in a design measured in years. A week, Dumbledore said gently. Of course, Harry, Creature will look after you. Grimmauld Place is under Fidelius. You are as safe here as anywhere for the moment. But you will come to the Burrow by the 1st, and you will not leave this house without word to the Order. Will you promise me that? I promise, Harry said, and did not, in his own mind, promise anything at all because he had learned the difference between the words that promises make and the making of a promise, and he had learned it, he thought, from watching the very man in front of him. Dumbledore studied him a moment longer. For an instant the kindness thinned, and something older and sharper looked out from behind it, the thing that had made Grindelwald run, the thing that had steered 50 votes for 50 years, and had swept across the grieving surface of Harry's mind one last time, not knocking now, testing the walls, looking for the seam where the display met the structure. And it found nothing because there was no seam. Harry had built the display into the structure. The mourning was real, the compliance was real on its own terms. The young man who wanted a week to mourn was a true thing and not a mask, and the mask was simply everything that true boy chose not to show, which was almost all of him. The sharp old thing withdrew satisfied or as near to satisfied as it ever came, and the kindness closed over it again like water over a stone. You have your mother's strength, Dumbledore said quietly at the door. She too was gentler on the surface than she was underneath. I see her in you more each year. He paused. Grieve, Harry, but do not let grief make you hard. The world will need what is soft in you before the end. It is the soft things that are worth saving. Remember that when it is difficult to remember. And he was gone out into the square to reappear somewhere Harry could not follow. And Harry stood in the hall of his own house and looked at the door that had closed behind the most dangerous man he had ever met, and let the grieving surface dissolve and felt the cold, clean thing underneath take the whole weight of him without a tremor. Do not let grief make you hard. He turned the sentence over in the flat private dark and found at the center of it the thing the old man had come to plant. A warning dressed as tenderness, aimed at the exact place where Harry was strongest, meant to make him distrust his own new hardness, to make him soften back into the grateful boy who ran toward warm hands. It was, Harry thought, a beautiful move. It was the move of a man who had felt the walls of a mind he could not read and had reached in the same breath for the only lever left to him, which was to make Harry do the old man's work for him and dismantle his own defenses out of a dread of becoming cruel. Creature came out of the shadows under the stairs where he had been standing silent and unnoticed through the whole of it and looked up at Harry with his fierce dry eyes. The old thief did not see, the elf said. It was not a question. No, Harry said. He saw exactly what I put in the window. He'll go back to his silver instruments and tell them the air is grieving and biddable and will be at the Burrow by the 1st. He crossed the hall and put his hand flat against the wall beside the listening watercolor, feeling the faint warmth of the charm, the little open ear the old man had left in a house that was no longer his to leave ears in. He did not disable it. A disabled ear told the listener he had been found out. A fed ear told the listener whatever you wanted him to hear. Creature, next week you tell me about the locket and about Regulus and about everything you've been keeping. And starting today, this frame hears only what I want the old man to hear. We're going to be very careful about what we say near the walls, do you understand? Creature's face folded, and this time what came through the fold was something Harry had not seen on it before, a savage, ancient, delighted loyalty, the loyalty of a creature that had served a great and terrible house and watched it fall into cowardice and ruin and had, at the very end of a long bitter life, found a master with a spine in him again. Creature understands, the elf breathed. Creature understands perfectly. The master feeds the thief lies through the thief's own ear. Oh, the master is a black in his bones, whatever his name says. Creature will help. Creature will help the master feed the old twinkling thief so many careful lies that when the thief finally reaches for his weapon, he will find he has been polishing a knife that belongs to someone else. Harry looked at the watercolor and at the hall of his house and at the elf who had waited 15 years, and he did not smile because smiling was loud and he was done being loud. But the cold, clean thing that had taken the weight of him settled a little deeper into its foundations and found them sound. Next week, he said, the locket, everything. He turned for the stairs, and the third step of them groaned under him, and he did not mind, because it was his stair now in his house, and it could groan as loud as it liked. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The first cut creature told the story on the fourth night in the drawing room, with the air pressed flat and private, and the watercolor in the hall, hearing only the murmur of a boy weeping quietly for his godfather, which was the murmur Harry had taught it to hear. The elf sat on the hearthrug with his knees drawn up and his enormous eyes fixed on the cold grate, as though the fire that was not there could show him the past, and he did not perform and he did not wail, and the absence of his usual theater was the first sign that what he was about to say had cost him 15 years of silence to keep. Master Regulus was 16, creature began, when he took the Dark Mark. Proud, so proud, the whole house was proud. To serve the Dark Lord was to be great, and the blacks had always wanted to be great, and Master Regulus was the finest of them, and creature loved him. He said the word as he had said it before, like a stone laid on a grave. The Dark Lord wanted a house elf for an hour, he said, to test a thing. Master Regulus offered creature because it was an honor to lend one's elf to the Dark Lord, and creature went proudly, and creature came back. He stopped. His long fingers nodded. Creature came back changed, and Master Regulus saw it. Master Regulus was the only one who ever saw when creature came back wrong. Harry sat still and let him find the pace of it. He had learned that the truest things arrived at their own speed and could not be hurried without breaking. There was a cave, creature said, by the sea. The Dark Lord took creature to a cave and made creature drink from a basin, a green fire that was not fire, that burned the inside and showed you every terrible thing while it burned. And when the basin was empty, there was a locket at the bottom. A locket the Dark Lord put there. And the Dark Lord left creature in the cave to die, because an elf was a thing you used and left, and the water in the cave was full of the drowned dead who took you down if you tried to drink. But creature, the old face twisted with a pride so fierce it was almost terrible. Creature is a house elf. The Dark Lord, so clever, so mighty, forgot that a house elf goes where his master sends him and comes back when his master calls, and no cave and no water and no basin can hold him against that magic, because it is older than the Dark Lord and deeper. Master Regulus had said, "Come back to me," so creature came back. And you told Regulus, Harry said. Creature told Master Regulus everything, and Master Regulus went very quiet, the way the master goes quiet, the same quiet, and then Master Regulus began to read, in this house, in the black books, for weeks. And one night Master Regulus called creature, and his face was the face of someone who has worked out a terrible thing and decided to do something about it anyway. Creature's voice dropped. He had worked out what the locket was. He made creature take him back to the cave. He drank the green fire himself so that creature would not have to drink it twice, and he made creature promise on the magic that binds us to take the real locket and destroy it and tell no one and never let the family know how Master Regulus died. And then the drowned dead came out of the water and took Master Regulus down into the Black Lake, and creature came home with the locket as he was ordered, and creature has been trying to destroy it ever since, for 15 years. And creature could not, nothing creature did to it left a mark, and creature failed his master, failed him, failed, you didn't fail him. Harry said it flatly, and the flatness reached the elf where softness would have slid off. You couldn't destroy it because it can't be destroyed by anything you had. That's not failure, that's the wrong tool. Regulus asked you to do a thing that needs a weapon almost no one in the world possesses. You kept it safe and hidden for 15 years so that when someone came who could finish it, the thing would still be here to finish. That's not failing an order, that's holding a line. Show me the locket, creature. The elf went and came back and set it in Harry's palm, and Harry looked at the thing that had killed Regulus Black and understood, holding it, everything the door in his own mind had been trying to tell him. The locket was heavier than gold. That was the first lie of it. It weighed like something that resented being held. A serpentine S worked in green stones curled across its face, and when Harry turned it to the candlelight, the stones caught the flame and held it a beat too long, the way the silver in Ragnarok's basin had held light, the way things hold light when they are hungry for it. He did not open it. He had read enough in 3 Nights of the Black Library's Forbidden Shelf to know that opening it invited the thing inside to speak, and the thing inside would speak in the voice best designed to unmake whoever held it, and he had no wish to be argued with by a fragment of a soul while he was still learning the shape of the argument. Instead, he did what the forbidden books had taught him in their cold clinical prose, the prose of men who studied soul magic the way a coroner studies a wound, without flinching and without mercy. He went quiet inside into the organized dark, and he reached not with his hand but with the attention he had spent all summer sharpening toward the locket, and he felt it, a knot. A snarl of will that did not belong in the world, a sliver of a person folded in on itself and sealed and set to guard, humming with a low cold appetite. It was aware of him. It turned toward his attention the way a blind thing turns toward warmth, and it reached back and it found at the far end of him, past the heavy door and the heavier one, the door he had not built, the one set at the wrong angle, standing ajar. And the two of them recognized each other. Harry held himself absolutely still in the dark of his own head, and watched the fragment in the locket lean toward the fragment behind the crooked door like 2 flames guttering toward a single draught, and he understood with a clarity that did not require the room where the old dread lived to open at all what he was. Not a boy with a scar, not a boy who had survived a curse. The book said a word for the crooked door and the thing behind it, and he had circled the word for 3 nights the way you circle a hole in the ice, and now the locket had spoken the word for him without a sound. He was a Horcrux. The knowledge did not flatten him. He had built the floor for exactly this in Ragnarok's office on the cold morning of the will. He stood on it now, and it held. A piece of Voldemort's soul had been driven into him on the night his mother died, when the curse rebounded off the protection she spent her life to make, and it had lived behind his eyes ever since, and it had made the door, and the door was why the visions came, and the door was why Parseltongue had risen in him unbidden, and the door was why a fragment of murder could reach into a boy's dreams and plant a trap that killed the last family he had, all of it. One wound, one crooked door, one design. And Dumbledore knew that was the part he made himself hold up to the cold light and turn until every face of it caught the flame, because it was the part that mattered and the part that would decide everything he did from here. Dumbledore was the finest mind in Britain and had spent years with his blackened hand and his pensive chasing exactly this magic. Dumbledore had looked at a scarred child who spoke to snakes and shared a murderer's dreams and had reached, unerringly, the conclusion Harry had just reached alone at 17 with a stolen library. Dumbledore had known that the child was a Horcrux. Had known that the piece of soul behind the crooked door could not be removed the way you remove a splinter, because the books all said the same thing in their cold clinical prose. A Horcrux is destroyed with its vessel, and there is no gentler way, and the container must be broken past repair for the fragment to die. Which meant that the design Dumbledore had built, the whole patient architecture of the grateful boy raised to run toward warm hands, had at its center a single requirement that the old man had wept about but never once named. For Voldemort to die, every fragment of him had to die, and one fragment lived behind a crooked door in a young man's head, and the vessel would have to die to kill it, raised like a pig for slaughter. The phrase surfaced from somewhere, from some overheard scrap of the Order's late-night talk, and Harry did not know whose words they were, but he knew now what they described. He had been kept alive, kept safe, kept warm enough and loved just enough, so that when the hour came he would walk to his death as he had been trained his whole life to walk toward fire, willingly, gratefully, because a wise, kind old man with tears in his eyes had told him it was the only way and the greatest gift he could give. Harry opened his eyes, the locket lay in his palm, cold and patient and hungry. You, he told it quietly, are going to be very useful, because the book said one more thing in a footnote in the driest prose of all, and Harry had read the footnote 4 times as closely as he had once read the letter from Gringotts. The vessel must be destroyed for the fragment to perish. It has never been demonstrated that vessel and fragment are inseparable in life. The question has not been studied, as no vessel capable of study has survived to pose it. No vessel capable of study. Except that a vessel capable of study was sitting in a drawing room in Islington with a stolen library and a great deal of patience, holding another vessel in his hand, and the second vessel was expendable in a way the first was not, and a man who wished to learn whether soul and container could be parted in life could hardly ask for a better subject to practice on than a locket he did not need to keep. Creature, Harry said. You couldn't destroy it, and I'm glad, because I don't want it destroyed yet. I want to study it. I'm going to learn everything this thing can teach me, and when I've learned all of it, I'll finish what Regulus started, and I'll do it properly, and I'll tell you when it's done so you can carry the news to wherever he is. He closed his fingers around the cold weight. Regulus worked out a terrible thing and decided to do something about it anyway. So did I. We're the same in that, he and I, you served a black who chose the hard right road at the end of a bad life. You're serving another one now. The elf looked at him, and the ancient face did the folding thing, and what came through was so nakedly grateful that Harry looked at the great to spare him. The Dark Lord split himself, Creature whispered. The locket, and the master says the master carries a piece too behind the crooked door, then there are others. Thing done once is done again by a man who liked the doing. Yes, Harry said, there are others, and now I know the shape of them, and I know how to feel for them, and I know how to end them. I have the enemy behind me and the enemy in front of me, Creature, and both of them think they've built me. He set the locket in a lead box the elf had readied and closed the lid on its low, cold appetite. They're going to learn otherwise one piece at a time, and they're not going to learn it from a confrontation. They're going to learn it when they reach for a lever and find it gone. There was a room beneath the house that Creature had never once mentioned, because no one had ever thought to be its master and ask. He took Harry down on the 5th night, through a door behind the kitchen that opened only to black blood, down a stair that went deeper than the foundations of Islington had any right to allow, into the old heart of the noble and most ancient house. The air changed as they descended. It thickened with a charge Harry felt on the back of his teeth, the taste of magic that had been left to steep in the dark for centuries, undisturbed, gathering the way rainwater gathers in a sealed cistern, until it is no longer quite water but something with a memory of its own. The room at the bottom was circular and domed and older than the house above it, its walls carved with a lattice of runes that ran into one another like the roots of a single vast tree, and at its center stood a low black basin, dry, its rim worn smooth by generations of hands. Wards. This was the ward heart of the house, the anchor from which every protection on the building above hung suspended, and it had gone cold and thin over 15 years without a lord to feed it, and it recognized Harry the instant he stepped off the last stair, the whole dark room turning toward him the way iron filings turn toward a magnet drawn near. The house is dying, Creature whispered. It has been dying since old mistress died and there was no true lord to hold the wards. The old thief's fidelia sits on top like a hand pressed over a wound, but underneath the house bleeds and only the house's own blood can staunch it. The master's blood. His enormous eyes shone in the moonlight. Will the master take up the house? It is not a small thing. It is the oldest magic the blacks kept, and it is on the forbidden list now, and the doing of it cannot be undone. The house will know the master's name to its stones forever after and answer him and no other while he lives. Harry looked at the dry basin and the vast root lattice of runes and the cold, thinning charge in the air, and he understood that this was the second door of the night, the one he had come down here to open. He had read of ward anchoring on the forbidden shelf. It was blood magic of the deepest and cleanest kind, not the butchery the ministry pretended all blood magic was when it struck it from the syllabus, but a covenant, a lord binding himself to a place and the place binding itself to the lord, older than the Wisengamot that had forbidden it, older than the men who had decided that ordinary people should not be trusted to know it. He drew the pale goblin-cut blade he had kept from Gringotts, and he cut his palm along the seam that had healed clean a week before, and he let his blood fall into the dry black basin. The room woke. It did not wake gently. The runes along the walls took the light and turned it, and the turning ran around the circle in a wave root-feeding root, until the whole lattice burned a deep arterial red, and the charge in the air rose from a taste on the teeth to a pressure against the whole body, a sound below sound, the house drawing its first full breath in 15 years through the throat of its new lord. Harry felt it happen inside him at the same instant it happened in the stones. The wards did not merely accept his blood. They reached up through it into him, learning him, mapping the shape of his will as he had learned to map his own mind. And where they touched the organized dark of him, they found the rooms he had built and the heavy doors, and at the far end the crooked door that was not his, and they flinched from it. And then, at his silent insistence, they flowed around it and sealed it into the house's protection along with the rest. So that the thing behind the crooked door was now not merely walled by Harry, but warded by a magic centuries deep. He stood in the red burning heart of his house with his blood in the basin, and the wards rising through him like sap rising through a tree in a single violent spring. And for a moment the sheer scale of what answered him was very close to unbearable, an ocean pouring through a channel built for a stream. And the old dread behind its door pushed once against the wood, and Harry held it and did not let it open, because a lord who quails before the thing that answers him is a lord who will be answered badly. He took the ocean, he took all of it. He shaped it the way the forbidden books had taught, not by forcing it but by offering it a form, and the wave of arterial light found the form he offered and poured itself into it, and the pressure that had been unbearable became, between one breath and the next, simply his, as ordinary and as total as the weight of his own hand. The runes settled to a steady deep glow, the air went from charged to merely alive, and Grimmauld Place above them ceased to bleed. Harry lifted his hand from the basin. The cut had closed. On the back of his hand, where no mark had been, a faint device had risen in the skin like a scar remembering itself, the sigil of the House of Black, and it faded as he watched until only he would ever know to look for it. He flexed his fingers, and the wards flexed with him, the whole house now an extension of his attention the way his arm was, every door and window and shadowed stair a nerve he could feel along. "Creature," he said, and his voice came out level, and the levelness in the red glowing dark was its own kind of power. "Try to tell someone the location of this house. Anyone, try right now." The elf opened his mouth, and his face contorted, and no sound came, and his eyes went wide. "Creature cannot, the secret, but the old thief holds the secret," he gasped. "The master has put a second lock under the first. The old thief can still give the door to whom he pleases. But the master can take it away from whom he pleases, and the old thief will never know a guest was turned back at a threshold he thought was his." "Good," Harry said. He climbed the stair with the house humming quietly along every nerve of him, and behind him the ward heart glowed steady and full, and he understood that he had done tonight a thing the registry of proscribed arts existed specifically to prevent, which was to become, through old forbidden covenant, unassailable in his own ground, answerable to no gatekeeper. Holding a power the gatekeepers had spent 50 years teaching people to believe was evil precisely so that no one but the gatekeepers would ever wield it. He had wielded it. Nothing evil had happened. A dying house had been made to live. And the law that called it dark, he thought, climbing toward the ordinary kitchen and the ordinary night, was not a law about magic at all. It was a law about who was allowed to be strong. Amelia Bones did not startle easily. It was the first thing Harry noticed about her, and the thing he built the whole meeting on. He had written to her through Ragnarok on goblin parchment under the seal of the House of Black, requesting an hour of the Director of Magical Law Enforcement's time on a matter concerning a sealed instrument of the Wisengamot in which she was named. He had chosen every word of the letter to do a specific job. A sealed instrument in which she was named would reach a career law officer as a small itch she could not scratch, and Amelia Bones had built a career on scratching exactly such itches. She replied within the day. She named a place that was not the ministry and not a public house, a solicitor's disused chambers off Diagon that the DMLE kept for meetings it did not wish to hold on the record, and Harry understood from the choice of ground that she had already decided to take him seriously, which was more than half of what he had come for. She was a square, gray, unhurried woman with a monocle and a jaw that had ended a great many careers, and she looked at Harry across the solicitor's table with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who had interrogated liars for 30 years and had stopped expecting to be surprised by them. "Mr. Potter," she said, "you have my niece's good opinion, which is worth something, and my curiosity, which is worth rather more because I ration it. You wrote that I am named in a sealed instrument. I have been named in a great many instruments. Tell me which, and tell me why a boy of 17 is the one bringing it to me and not a solicitor, and we will see whether the hour is well spent." Harry laid the certified copy of his parents' will on the table and turned it so she could read it, and he did not say a word, because Ragnarok had taught him without meaning to that a document laid flat says more than a mouth, and because Amelia Bones was a woman who would resent being told what to see and would trust only what she found herself. He watched her read it. He watched the flat assessing gaze move down the page and reach the list of guardians, 5 names in order of preference, and stop on the 5th, which was hers, and he watched her read it a second time to be certain she had read it right the first. Then he watched her reach the clause below the 5th name, the one in his mother's hand. Under no circumstances is Harry to be placed with Petunia Dursley, and he watched something happen in the square gray face that did not show as expression exactly but showed as a stillness, the particular stillness of a professional who has just seen a crime and is deciding very fast and very quietly what kind of crime it is. "This was sealed," she said, "within a week of my parents' deaths. By order of the chief warlock of the Wisengamot on grounds of my security, and you were placed, with Petunia Dursley where the will forbids, and the 4 guardians named ahead of you were never approached, though one of them was your predecessor's predecessor at this very desk and would have taken me without a second thought and had the standing to make it stick." Harry kept his voice level and let the facts do the work. "You were 5th director. You never knew you were named because the man who sealed the will made certain none of the 5 ever knew. Sirius Black was first and went to Azkaban without a trial you might have insisted upon. The Longbottoms were second, Professor McGonagall was 4th, and you were 5th, and here we are, and I am not a solicitor, and I brought it to you myself because I have learned not to trust the delivery of important things to people I did not choose." She set the will down. She took the monocle out of her eye and polished it on her sleeve, which Harry understood was the thing she did instead of showing her face, and when she put it back her voice had gone very precise. "You understand what you are alleging," she said. "You are alleging that Albus Dumbledore, in his capacity as Chief Warlock, misused the seal of the Wisengamot to override a lawful testamentary instruction and place a warded child where the child's own murdered parents had forbidden. That is not a small allegation, Mr. Potter. That is the kind of allegation that ends the person who makes it, if the person who makes it is a boy and the person alleged against is the most trusted wizard in Britain. Why are you not afraid to make it?" "Because I'm not asking you to act on it," Harry said, and here he let the tactical part of himself come fully forward, because Amelia Bones was a mind that respected being spoken to as a mind. "If I wanted him ended, I'd have gone to the prophet, and the prophet would have printed it, and he'd have explained it away in an afternoon with a rueful smile and a plausible reason, because he always has a plausible reason and the public has always let him have it. I don't want a scandal that dies in a week. I want you to know that's all. I want one person at the head of magical law in this country to have read that clause in my mother's hand, so that the next time the chief warlock lays a reasonable measure before you with a plausible reason and a sad smile, you remember that you have seen with your own eyes one thing he did with a seal and a plausible reason, and you weigh his next reasonable measure a little more carefully than you weighed the last." He let that settle. "I'm not recruiting you, Director. I wouldn't insult you by trying. I'm informing you. What you do with the information is entirely yours, and that's the point. He's spent 50 years making sure the good people of this country only ever have the information he chooses to give them. I'm giving you some he didn't choose. That's the whole of my business here." The chambers were quiet. Somewhere beyond the shuttered window Diagon Alley went about its nervous wartime mourning. Amelia Bones looked at the will and at Harry and at the will again, and the flat assessing gaze had changed by a degree that Harry doubted anyone but a person watching for it would have caught, and he had been watching for it. "I knew your parents a little," she said at last. "Your mother testified for me once in a case that mattered. She was gentler on the surface than she was underneath." It was the second time in a week someone had said that of Lily Potter, and Harry said it beside the first in the plain room and marked that the 2 men who had said it were on opposite sides of the thing he was building. "I will keep the copy if you will permit it. It's certified, keep it. There are others where he can't reach them. You have thought about where he can reach, it was not a question. You have thought about a great deal for 17. She stood and gathered the will and paused with it in her square, capable hands. "I will tell you one thing in exchange, Mr. Potter, because you did me the courtesy of not trying to buy me, and because a fair dealing deserves a fair return, which is a principle the Chief Warlock's world has been steadily teaching people to forget. Watch the Registry of Proscribed Arts. There is a 5th expansion coming before the Wisengamot this autumn. I have read the draft. It reclassifies the whole of the mind arts, a clumency among them, as regulated magic requiring a ministry license to study or teach, with the licenses issued at the discretion of a committee the Chief Warlock chairs." Her monocle caught the shuttered light. "I found it a curious priority in the middle of a war to spend the Wisengamot's time on forbidding people to defend their own minds. I could not think whom it might be aimed at. Perhaps you can. Good day, Mr. Potter." Do not write to me again unless it matters. When it matters, write." She left, and Harry sat alone in the borrowed chambers with the war going on outside the shutters, and he took the thing she had given him and laid it on the table in the plain room, and he looked at it for a long time. It had gone exactly as he had built it to go, and the going pleased him less than the manner of it. He had not lied to Amelia Bones once. That was the part he turned over now in the quiet, testing it for the flaw he was certain must be there. He had shown her a true document and told her a true history and asked her for nothing, and she had walked out changed, and he had gained more from that hour of honesty than he had ever gained from a year of the old man's careful management. It suggested a thing he was not yet ready to fully believe, raised as he had been on the opposite lesson, that the truth, handed to the right person in the right order, did more work than any manipulation and left no debt behind it, and could not be turned against you later the way a lie always could. Dumbledore had never learned it. Dumbledore had spent 50 years managing what people knew, and it had made him powerful and alone, and in the end beatable, because a man who lives by controlling information can be undone the moment someone hands his people a fact he did not choose. Harry set the thought beside the others on the table and did not decide about it yet, but he marked it. It might, he thought, be the whole difference between what he was building and what he was tearing down. A law coming in autumn to forbid the one art that had made him invisible to Dumbledore, aimed whether the old man knew it consciously or only felt it as a wise precaution at the exact place where Harry had slipped the leash. The design reaching, without yet knowing what it reached for, toward the one door it could not read. The first cut had landed, not on the man, on the machine. He had put a fact the old man did not choose into the head of the one law officer in Britain who could not be talked out of a fact once she had seen it. And he had done it in a way that left no scandal to be explained away and no lever for Dumbledore to pull, because you cannot uninform a mind like Amelia Bones, and you cannot even know she has been informed unless she chooses to tell you, and she would not choose. He had spent one meeting and one certified copy, and in exchange he had turned a pillar of the ministry from a reliable stone in Dumbledore's arch into a stone that would, from now on, quietly test its own weight before it bore his. He gathered his cloak. There was one more thing to do this week, and it was the hardest, because it was the one where he would have to stand in front of the old man and be looked at. The burrow was loud and warm and full of red-headed noise, and Harry walked into it on the first of the month exactly as promised and let it close over him like water over stone. He had forgotten in the cold, clean weeks how good the warmth was, and he noted the forgetting and did not let it soften him, because the warmth was real and the danger of the warmth was also real, and both facts could be true at once. Mrs. Weasley fed him. Ron thumped him on the back and talked about Quidditch as though Quidditch were a thing that still mattered, and part of Harry was grateful for it, and he let that part show because it was true and truth was the safest thing to show. Hermione watched him across the table with the sharp, worried attention she gave to problems she had not yet solved, and Harry knew he would have to decide before term how much of the design to give her, because Hermione was the one person under this roof whose mind could see the board if he showed it to her, and the same fact made her the one person who could ruin everything if she saw it before she was ready to keep it. He set Hermione on the table in the plain room and let her wait. Not yet, soon. He would need a mind beside his own before the end, and hers was the finest he knew, but a mind that fine had to be brought to the truth in the right order, or it would run ahead of him to the wrong conclusion and act on it out of the goodness that made it worth having. He tested her once gently over the washing up, when Ron had gone to feed the ghoul and the kitchen was warm and steam-fogged and safe. He mentioned, in passing, that he had been reading about the old Wisengamot and had been surprised how much of the current law was younger than he'd assumed, that half the things everyone called ancient tradition had been voted in within living memory by people who were still alive. He watched her take the thought and turn it, and he watched her almost see the shape behind it, the sharp mind reaching for the pattern the way it always reached, and then he watched her set it down, because Hermione trusted the institutions of the magical world as he had once trusted the man who ran them, as fixed points a person could stand on, and to see the pattern she would first have to let go of the standing, and she was not ready to fall. He changed the subject before she could feel the ground move. She would need the floor built under her first, the way Ragnarok had built it under him before he took away the bridge. He owed her that much order. Rushing her would not be kindness. It would be doing to her exactly what had been done to him, handing her a truth too large to hold and calling it a gift. He would give it to her in the right sequence or not at all. That was the difference, he thought, drying a plate she had washed, between using a person and trusting one, and he intended to learn the difference even if the man who had raised him never had. Dumbledore came on the third evening, as Harry had known he would, because a shepherd counts his flock and Harry had made himself, all summer, a sheep worth counting. He came ostensibly to speak with Arthur about ministry matters, and he stayed for supper, and after supper he found Harry alone in the orchard the way a man finds a thing he has arranged to find, and the September dusk was gold and cool and smelled of windfall apples going soft in the grass. "You look better," Dumbledore said. "The burrow suits you. I am glad you came." "Thank you for letting me have the week," Harry said. "I needed it. I think I could sleep in that house now without—" He let it trail and let the trailing do the work and watched the old man's kindness reach for the opening the way it always did. "Grief keeps its own calendar," Dumbledore said gently. "There is no hurrying it and no use pretending it is done before it is." He turned an apple over in his good hand, the blackened fingers of the other tucked from sight. Harry, I must raise a small matter, and I hope you will forgive an old man's carefulness. When you came of age, certain arrangements I had maintained for your protection naturally lapsed. Your accounts, your affairs, it is nothing you need attend to, but I thought for continuity, and only if you wished it, that I might continue to look after such things until the war is past and you have the leisure to learn them yourself. Gringotts can be a maze to a young man with a great deal on his mind. I would spare you the maze if you would let me. And there it was, the reach. The hand extended for the lever, kindly, reasonably, dressed as a favor, asking to be given back the exact instrument that had rotted at midnight 3 days after Harry's birthday. Harry had known some version of this was coming since Ragnarok read him the will, and he had rehearsed the shape of his answer until it was smooth as river stone. "That's really kind," Harry said, and made his face do the grateful thing, and underneath the grateful thing the cold, clean part of him watched the old man's eyes for the flicker that would tell him whether Dumbledore already knew the accounts were sealed. But the goblins already sorted it all out when I turned 17. There was a whole meeting, ledgers everywhere. Honestly, it was awful. I didn't understand half of it, but they said now that I'm of age, it all just goes to me and they manage it and I don't have to do anything. He shrugged, a boy overwhelmed by adult paperwork. I think it's already done. They had me sign about 100 things. I was glad to get out of there, should I not have signed them. I can ask them to change it back if you think. No, Dumbledore said, and the word came a half beat too quickly and Harry caught the half beat and set it on the table and gave no sign. No, of course not. If Gringotts has taken the matter in hand, that is entirely proper. Goblins are meticulous. I should not have troubled you with it. He smiled, and the smile was warm, and behind the warmth the sharp old thing was doing arithmetic of its own. Harry could see it working, could see the old man recalculating a small assumption he had held so long he had forgotten it was an assumption. Potter's affairs run through me. It had been true for 16 years. It had stopped being true, and the stopping had been done by goblins at Harry's own request, quietly, with 100 signatures, and there was nothing in it Dumbledore could object to without revealing that he minded, and he could not afford to reveal that he minded, and so he smiled and turned the apple over and said nothing more about it, but he minded. Harry watched him mind. And he watched the old man's gaze come to rest on him in the gold dusk with something new in it, something that had not been there in the hall at Grimmauld a week before, a faint attentiveness, the attentiveness of a man who has reached for a familiar handhold in the dark and found where the handhold had always been smooth wall. "You have grown up a great deal this summer, Harry," Dumbledore said quietly, and it was not entirely a compliment, and both of them knew it was not, and neither of them said so. "I had to," Harry said, and let it sound like grief, and meant it as a fact, and the two meanings sat one inside the other where only he could see the join. Overhead the first stars came out over the orchard, and down in the crooked house someone lit the lamps, and the windfall apples went soft in the cooling grass, and the most dangerous man in Britain stood beside the weapon he had built for 16 years and felt, for the length of a held breath, the smooth cold wall where the handhold used to be, and could not for the life of him say when it had changed. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Old Man's Tools. Harry felt the castle before he saw it. The carriages came up the long dark road from Hogsmeade with the lake on one side breathing cold, and while the other seventh years talked over each other about the summer and the war and who had not come back this year, Harry sat with his hands loose in his lap and let his attention open as he had taught it to open in the Wardheart under Grimmauld, and he felt Hogwarts rise ahead of him in the dark like a chord struck on an instrument too large to see. It was full of soul magic. He had never known that all the years he had walked its halls as a schoolboy, he had not had the sense to feel it with. Now he did, and the castle sang with old bindings, the deep patient wards of the founders, the ghosts who were their own kind of anchored fragment, the sheer weight of 1,000 years of magic worked into stone. And threaded through all of it, faint and cold and wrong, a single note that did not belong. A snarl of will, folded and sealed and hungry, exactly like the note the locket sang in its lead box. Somewhere above him, high in the castle, on the 7th floor, if his sense of it was true, a piece of Voldemort's soul sat waiting in a room that hid itself, and it had been sitting there for years while 100 professors and 1,000 children walked past the blank stretch of wall behind which it slept, and only one person in the castle had ever known it was there. 2 people now. Harry closed his attention and looked out at the lit windows of the school coming near, and he understood that he had walked back into the center of the machine on purpose, into the one place where all 3 of the things he needed sat within a few hundred yards of one another. The old man who had built the design, the teacher who had been the old man's sharpest tool, and a fragment of the enemy forgotten in a hidden room waiting to teach him everything the locket could not. He had come back to school. It was, he thought, the last thing anyone watching him would expect of a person planning to burn down a world, and that was exactly why he had done it. Minerva McGonagall called him to her office in the first week on the pretext of his newt selections, and Harry went knowing the pretext was thin because she had signed off on his selections by owl already, and a second meeting meant she wanted to look at him with her own eyes. She was 4th on the list. He had not forgotten it. He sat across her desk while she poured tea he had not asked for into a cup with a chipped rim, and he watched her watch him, and he let her see the grieving, steadier version of the student she remembered because it was true and because she had earned honesty more than most. "You have changed, Potter," she said. She did not soften it. She never softened anything, which was, he thought, the thing that made her worth turning. Half my colleagues have decided the change is grief and the other half have decided it is trouble, and I have decided to reserve judgment until I have looked at you. I have now looked at you. She set down the pot. You are not in trouble, you are worse than trouble, you are quiet. I have taught a great many loud, dangerous children and exactly one or two quiet ones, and the quiet ones alarm me far more because a loud child tells you what he's going to do. Is there something you wish to tell me? Yes, Harry said and watched her brace for a confession and gave her instead a question because a question could not be reported the way a confession could. You were there the night they left me at the Dursleys. I've been reading this summer about all of it, and your name came up in a way I didn't expect. You were on that street, weren't you, before Hagrid brought me? Something moved behind the square spectacles. She did not lie. He had counted on her not lying, had built the question on it. I was, she said. I watched them all day, the Dursleys, to see what sort of people my colleague meant to leave you with. Her mouth thinned to a line. They were the worst sort of muggles, I said so. I sat on that garden wall as a cat for a full day, and I watched that man shout and that woman spy on her neighbors over the hedge, and I told Albus to his face that these were the worst people imaginable to raise you, and that surely there was somewhere better, someone who loved your parents, someone who would love you. And what did he say? He said it had to be here, that there was protection here that could be nowhere else. Blood protection, he called it, though he did not explain it, and I did not press because he was Albus, and Albus always had a reason, and the reasons were always sound. She stopped. Harry watched her hear her own sentence land, watched the phrase Albus always had a reason strike her ear in the particular way a phrase strikes when you have said it 1,000 times without listening to it. I trusted his judgment, she said more slowly, as I have trusted it my whole career. He is very seldom wrong, Potter. That is not flattery, it is 30 years of evidence. I'm not saying he was wrong to want me protected, Harry said, and this was the whole of the move, and he made it gently, laying it down and stepping back the way Ragnarok laid down a ledger. I'm saying you looked at those people for a full day and knew in your bones they were the worst possible place for a child, and you told him so to his face and he overruled you and you let him because he always has a reason and the reasons are always sound. And I grew up in the cupboard under their stairs, Professor, for 10 years, so one of two things is true. Either his reason was worth a decade in that house, and he never once checked whether the protection was worth the price he'd set me. Or the reason wasn't the real reason at all. I don't know which. I'm not asking you to know either. I'm only asking you to notice that the one time your bones told you he was wrong about me, you were right, and he was the one who wouldn't listen. That's all. Thank you for the tea. He stood before she could answer because the seed did its work in silence and not in argument, and he had learned that the trick of it was to plant and leave. At the door he paused because there was one more true thing he could afford to give her, and she had earned it. You'd have taken me, he said, if they'd asked you, wouldn't you? In a heartbeat, Minerva McGonagall said before she could weigh whether to, and the answer came up out of her from somewhere below thought, and Harry heard in it that she had wondered over the years in the small hours and had put the wondering away because the wondering led somewhere she did not wish to go. He had just shown her the door to that place. He did not push her through it. He only left it standing open and went out and let her sit alone with a chipped teacup and a splinter of doubt about the judgment of the man she had trusted for 30 years, which was exactly one splinter more than she had carried when she poured the tea. The second guardian, turned by an inch quietly with nothing said that could be carried to anyone. He walked back to the tower thinking that the machine was not made of stone after all. It was made of people who had each, at some point, felt their own bones tell them something and had talked themselves out of listening because Albus always had a reason. He did not need to break the people. He only needed to remind them, one at a time, of the moment they had stopped trusting themselves. The machine would come apart on its own once enough of its parts remembered they had once known better. Severus Snape hated him with a purity that had always been useful and had never, until now, been legible. Harry watched him through the first weeks of term with the cold, clean attention he gave to everything now, and he read the hatred as he had read the Wisengamot ledger, laying the years side by side. Snape hated him on sight, always had, from the first potions lesson when Harry was 11 and knew nothing. A man does not hate a stranger of 11 for himself. A man hates a stranger of 11 for someone the stranger resembles, and Harry had been told his whole life that he had his father's face and his mother's eyes, and he had assumed the way children assume that the hatred was about his father. He watched Snape now and saw that he had assumed wrong. It was not James Potter's face that made the man's jaw tighten when Harry walked into a room. It was Lily Evans's eyes, and the tightening was not hatred at all, or not only hatred. It was the particular cruelty of a man forced every single day for 6 years to look into the eyes of a woman he had loved and lost, set in the face of the man who had won her. That was a lever. Harry set it on the table in the plain room and did not touch it yet because a lever pulled clumsily breaks in the hand, and this one would only work once. He engineered the meeting for a Thursday after the last class in the dungeon corridor where Snape kept his private stores, and he did it by the simple method of being caught somewhere he was not supposed to be, which was the one thing guaranteed to make Severus Snape stop and engage rather than sweep past. He let himself be found with his hand on the door of the storeroom, and he let Snape descend on him in a billow of black robes and cold fury, and he waited for the sneer to finish forming before he spoke. I know about the prophecy, Harry said quietly before Snape could take points or bark at attention. The whole of it, and I know you were the one who carried the first half to him in the Hog's Head when you were young and stupid and angry, and I know that's why they died. I'm not here to throw it at you. I'm here because you're the only person left alive who is in the room for the parts I need, and because whatever else you are, you're the one man in this castle Dumbledore doesn't fully own, and you've known it for years and it's been eating you." The corridor went very quiet. Snape's face did a thing Harry had never seen it do, which was to stop performing. The sneer fell away, and under it was something older and more dangerous and infinitely more tired, and the black eyes fixed on Harry's with the full weight of a legilimens who had spent a war reading the minds of murderers. The pressure came against Harry's mind like a blade laid flat against the throat, testing, and Harry let it in exactly as far as he had let Dumbledore in and no further, and he watched Snape find the morning and the schoolboy resentment and the ordinary furniture of a 17-year-old's mind, all of it true, arranged in the window, and he watched Snape reach past it out of professional habit and find, where the rest of the house should have been, a smooth, cold wall. Snape withdrew. The tired, dangerous thing in his face sharpened into something almost like respect and entirely like alarm. "Who taught you occlumency?" he said. It was not the question he had been going to ask. "It was not me. I failed to teach you anything but contempt by design, as you have evidently worked out. So who?" "No one. I read 2 books and my godfather died and I found I had a reason to learn." Harry took his hand off the storeroom door. "You're going to want to know how much I know before you decide what to do about me. So I'll tell you, and I'll tell you the truth, because I've decided that between the two of us the truth is the only currency worth spending. I know Voldemort made himself deathless by tearing his soul and hiding the pieces. I know one of the pieces is a locket that killed Regulus Black, and I have it. I know another is in this castle on the 7th floor behind a wall that most people can't see. And I know," he said, holding Snape's eyes without a blink, "that there is a piece in me behind my scar, put there the night my mother died. And I know that Albus Dumbledore has known it since I was 11 years old and has never told me and has raised me carefully, kindly, to walk to my own death when the time comes, because the piece in me has to die for Voldemort to die, and the cleanest way to kill a Horcrux is to destroy the thing that holds it." He watched the words land. He watched them land on a man who had thought he already carried the whole terrible truth alone, and discovered in a dungeon corridor that a child had assembled it independently and was reciting it back without a tremor. And he watched, at the very end, the one part Snape had not expected, the part that broke the last strut of the man's composure, because Harry said it flat and plain, without self-pity, as arithmetic. "You didn't know he meant for me to die," Harry said, "did you? He let you believe you were protecting her son. He let you spend 16 years thinking that if you kept me alive, you were keeping faith with her. And the whole time, keeping me alive was only ever the long way round to spending me. You've been guarding a lamb for the slaughter and calling it love, and he let you, because a guilty man guards more fiercely than a paid one, and your guilt was the finest lock on the door." Snape did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice had gone to something scraped and low, stripped of the classroom entirely. "He told me," Snape said, "that when the time came it might be possible to save you, that he was not certain that there was a chance." The black eyes were terrible. "He told me that, standing in his office with that look, and I believed him because I wished to believe him, which is the only reason anyone ever believes Albus about anything." His hands had closed into fists at his sides. "You are telling me there was never a chance, that the possibility he dangled was a kindness he offered me so that I would keep the lamb fed and unafraid." "I'm telling you I don't know what he believes," Harry said. "That's the trap of him. He might even think there's a chance. He's good enough to make the lie true in his own head so that when he tells it, it isn't lying. But the design underneath doesn't need me to live, and everything he's ever done to me is consistent with a design that spends me, and nothing he's ever done is consistent with a design that saves me. You taught me to read people, Professor. By being a person, I had to learn to read to survive. So read him. Lay his years side by side and tell me I'm wrong." Snape looked at him, and Harry saw the man do it, saw him lay the years side by side in the space of a held breath, saw the conclusion arrive in the terrible black eyes the way the conclusion about the will had arrived in Amelia Bones's gray ones. "What do you want?" Snape said at last. It was surrender of a kind, though neither of them named it. "Your memories," Harry said, "the prophecy in full, the night you turned. Everything he ever said to you about me in his own words, so I have it and not your account of it. Give me those, and then keep doing exactly what you're doing. Spy for him, sneer at me in class, report to him that I'm grieving and defiant and difficult, all of which is true. I don't want you to change a single visible thing." He paused. "I want one man on the inside of his confidence who is no longer his, that's all. You've been his for 16 years because you thought serving him was serving her. It wasn't. It was serving the man who was always going to let her son die. You've carried it for him long enough. You can set it down. I'm giving you somewhere to set it down." And Severus Snape, who had loved one woman his whole ruined life and served the wrong master out of that love, looked at her eyes in her son's face, and for once the looking did not make his jaw tight. It made something in him let go that had been clenched for 16 years, and he turned without a word and led Harry into the storeroom and took a wand to his own temple and drew out the silver threads one after another and gave them over and did not ask for them back. Harry watched the memories that night in the ward hard under Grimmauld, into which he had carried a shallow stone basin of his own, because a pensive was only a vessel and vessels could be made by anyone who understood what they were for, and he understood a great deal now about vessels. He went into the silver twice, the first time to see, the second time to be certain of what he had seen, because a man who acts on a single viewing of anything acts on a story, and Harry had sworn off stories. He saw the Hog's Head as it had been 16 years before, and a younger Dumbledore in a private room above the bar, and a woman with enormous glasses and a shawl speaking in a voice that was not her own, a voice that came up out of her from somewhere below thought. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. He watched the young Severus Snape, all elbows and hunger and ambition, press to the keyhole on the stair, catch the first half and lose the rest to a barman's rough hands, and carry his fragment of a prophecy to a master who would kill a family over it. He watched the whole tragedy start from an eavesdropped sentence in an ambitious boy's bad hour, and he felt the shape of how large things grow from small ones, and he did not look away because looking away was a luxury he had given up. Then he saw the second memory, and the second memory was the one Snape had given him without being asked, and Harry understood, watching it, that it was a gift and a confession and a knife all at once. Dumbledore's office. Snape, older, grayer, standing before the desk with the particular stillness of a man receiving an order he does not like, and Dumbledore's voice, patient and gentle and terrible, explaining a thing he had clearly explained before. Tell me again why the child must be kept safe. Because the Dark Lord's soul is in him, Severus. Because on the night he goes to face Voldemort, he must be alive to do it, and the fragment within him must be alive to be destroyed with him. I have watched over him these many years for one reason, so that at the right moment he can die. He watched Snape recoil on the silvered stone, 16 years younger than the man who had handed the memory over. He heard Snape's voice crack across the office. You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment. You have raised him like a pig for slaughter. And he watched the old man's face, and there was pain in it, real pain, and beneath the pain the same immovable certainty Aberforth would name for him a week later. And Dumbledore said only quietly, do not tell me now that you have grown to care for the child, and turned the knife on the one man in the room who had loved, and Harry saw the whole method of him in that single sentence. Even Snape's love was a resource to be provoked or shamed into service as the design required. Harry came up out of the basin and sat for a while in the deep quiet of the ward heart with the runes glowing steady around him, and he did not weep and he did not rage and he did not do any of the things a story would have had him do. He had the words now. Not his own reconstruction, not Aberforth's account, not a book's dry footnote, but the old man's own voice in the old man's own office, saying the thing plainly to the one witness who could not be doubted, so that at the right moment he can die. He had suspected it in Ragnarok's office. He had deduced it in the locket's cold pull. Now he owned it in evidence, certified by the memory of a man who had watched it happen and hated himself for his part in it. He conjured a stoppered vial and drew a copy of the second memory out of his own recollection with a care Snape had taught him without meaning to, and he sealed it, and he wrote no label, and he set it in the lead box beside the locket, and he understood that he had just made his first true weapon against the machine. Not a spell, a sentence. In a room full of people who had never once laid the years side by side, the old man's own voice saying so that at the right moment he can die would do more than any curse Harry could cast. He set it aside to keep. Its season would come. Aberforth Dumbledore poured fire whiskey into a glass that had never in living memory been clean and pushed it across the bar of the hog's head, and did not offer one to Harry, and looked at him with eyes so like his brother's that Harry felt the resemblance as a physical thing, blue and pale and piercing, set in a face that had been left out in every weather life had. You're the Potter boy, Aberforth said. You've come to ask about Ariana, which means someone's finally told you enough of the truth to know there's more of it, and you've had the wit to come to the one man in Britain who'll give it to you straight because he stopped loving my brother about 100 years ago and never took it back up. He drank. Ask then. I've been waiting 50 years for someone to ask who wasn't a reporter or a fool. Tell me about the greater good, Harry said. Aberforth laughed, a short, ugly sound with no humor in it. Yes, that was the phrase, for the greater good. Gellert had it carved over the door of the prison he built in the end, which tells you everything if you've the sense to hear it. He set the glass down. My brother was the cleverest boy anyone had ever seen. Clever than the teachers, clever than the books, so clever it curdled in him. Because a boy that clever grows up certain that the world would run better if it would only do as he said, and my brother was never once in his long life able to shake that certainty. He met Gellert Grindelwald the summer our mother died, and the two of them spent 2 months building a philosophy, and the philosophy was simple, and it was this: that wizards were better than muggles and stronger, and that the strong have not merely the right but the duty to rule the weak for the weak's own good, and that any cruelty done along the way is forgiven in advance by the goodness of the end, for the greater good. They were going to remake the world, my brother and his friend. They were 17. The old man's mouth twisted. You're 17, so was Regulus Black, I hear, when he took the mark. It's the age for it, the age when you're clever enough to build a cage and not yet wise enough to know you're standing in it. What happened to your sister? My sister was damaged, as a little girl, by muggle boys who saw her do magic and were frightened and did what such boys do. It broke something in her, and her magic turned inward and went wrong, and she needed watching always, gentle watching, and she needed her family more than she needed a philosophy. Aberforth's voice did not rise, and the not rising was worse than shouting. And my brother, who was meant to be watching her while I was at school, was instead in the garden with his brilliant friend, remaking the world for its own good. And when I came home and told him he was neglecting her, that his greater good could wait, that the one actual good in front of him was a broken girl who loved him, we fought. The three of us, wands out in the parlor over Ariana's head, and a curse went wide, and no one ever knew whose. And Ariana died on the floor between us, 14 years old, while three clever men argued about the future of the world. The fire in the grate popped. Somewhere upstairs a goat complained. Harry sat very still and let the old man finish, because he had learned that the truest things arrived at their own speed. Gellert ran, Aberforth said, and my brother's grief nearly killed him, and it should have, and instead it did the one thing loss does to a man that clever. It taught him the wrong lesson. He decided that the tragedy was not that he had reached for power over the world. He decided the tragedy was that he had reached for it in the wrong spirit, carelessly, for glory, and let it slip. So he spent the rest of his life reaching for it again, in the right spirit, patiently, humbly, for everyone's good, telling himself the whole time that he had renounced ambition because he'd learned to wear it as duty instead of as a crown. He didn't renounce a thing, he refined it. He built himself a world where he held every string, and he called the holding wisdom, and he called the refusal to trust anyone else with the strings humility. And he grieved so beautifully and so publicly for the sister he neglected that no one ever thought to ask whether a man who needs to hold all the strings has truly changed from the youth who wanted to rule the world, or has merely got better at it. Harry said nothing for a while. Then he said, he genuinely believes he's good. Oh, entirely. Aberforth refilled his own glass. That's what makes him what he is. Gellert knew he was a monster, and it freed him to be a worse one. My brother has never for one day believed he was anything but the world's most reluctant servant, dragged again and again to power he never wanted, forced by circumstance to decide for everyone because no one else could be trusted to decide as wisely. That's not a lie he tells, it's the water he swims in. And a man like that is more dangerous than Gellert ever was, because you cannot shame him and you cannot bribe him and you cannot even really beat him, because every defeat only proves to him that the world needed him to try harder. The pale eyes fixed on Harry. So whatever it is you're planning, Potter, and you've the face of a boy planning something, you'd best understand you're not fighting a wicked man. You're fighting a good man's certainty that he alone can be trusted. That's the strongest thing there is. I watched it kill my sister, mind it doesn't kill you. It won't, Harry said, and stood and left the coins on the bar, though Aberforth had poured him nothing, and walked back up the dark road to the castle with the whole root of the design finally in his hands. Dumbledore sent for him the following week, and Harry went, because he had decided the time had come to let the old man see a little of the wall. The office was as it had always been, the whirring silver instruments, the sleeping portraits, Fawkes drowsing on his perch in a smolder of red and gold, and Dumbledore behind the great desk with his blackened hand resting on the wood where anyone could see it now past hiding. He looked older than he had in the orchard. The hand had spread its ruin up past the wrist. Harry noted it and set it on the table in the plain room and said nothing, because a man dying of a curse he took reaching for a hallow was a man on a clock, and a clock was a thing you could use. Sit, Harry, Dumbledore said. I think it is time we were honest with one another. I have felt these past weeks that you have grown away from me, and I believe I know why, and I would rather we spoke of it plainly than let it fester into something that serves only our enemy. He folded his hands. You have questions about the night your parents died, about the prophecy, about why your life has been shaped as it has. I have kept things from you, and I did it for reasons I believed were sound, and you are old enough now and have suffered enough that the keeping does you more harm than the telling would. So ask me anything, and I will answer you truly, and we will begin again with nothing between us. It was, Harry thought, a masterful opening. It conceded just enough to seem like surrender. It offered honesty as a gift while reserving to the giver the choice of which honesty to give. And it reframed the whole poisoned history as a father's excessive care, so that any anger Harry showed would look like a child's ingratitude and any calm would look like reconciliation. Every stone of it laid true, every apology a load-bearing wall. All right, Harry said, I'll ask. There's a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head, isn't there, and it has to die for him to die. And the only way to kill it is to kill me, and you've known since I was 11. And everything you've done since then has been arranged so that when the time comes, I'll do it willingly. That's the honest version, isn't it? That's the thing you're offering to tell me plainly now that you can feel me slipping and you need me back on the leash before the end. The office was silent. Fawkes stopped preening. Dumbledore's face did not change, and the not changing was itself the confirmation, because a man surprised by a false accusation frowns and a man caught by a true one goes still, and Albus Dumbledore went very still. Who told you? He said at last gently. No one told me. That's what you can't get past, isn't it? There's no leak to plug, no traitor to find, no memory anyone stole. I read the books you had banned and I worked it out myself, sitting alone, because you made me clever the same way you made me grateful by leaving me nothing else to be. Harry leaned forward. You want to tell me the truth your way, so let me save you the trouble and tell it mine, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, and I don't think you'll find much. You met a prophecy when you were younger, and it unsettled you, because prophecies are the one thing a man who holds all the strings can't hold. So you did what you always do with a thing you can't control. You made yourself the one person who understood it. You placed me where I'd be broken down small enough to shape. You sealed the wool that would have put me somewhere I'd have grown up loved and difficult and free. You gave me just enough warmth at just the right intervals to make me spend my whole childhood aching toward the next kind hand, so that when the kindest hand of all pointed me at a fire, I'd walk into it grateful. And you told yourself every single step that you were doing it for the greater good, and you grieved so beautifully over each thing you did to me that you never once had to notice you were the one doing it. He had not raised his voice. He watched the words go into the old man and understood watching that he had struck the one place that could be struck because Dumbledore flinched minutely at the greater good, the way a man flinches at a name he thought no one else knew to use against him. Aberforth, Dumbledore said softly. Ariana, Harry answered, 14 years old on a parlor floor while three clever men argued about the future of the world. You didn't learn not to reach for power that day, Professor. You learned to reach for it so gently that no one would ever again be able to tell you to stop. And you've been reaching ever since, all of it. The Wisengamot, the registry, the school, the order me, every string in your two hands, and you call it duty and you believe it, and that's the worst part, because a man who knew he was doing wrong could be reasoned with, and you can't because you swim in your own goodness like a fish in water, and you'll drown me in it smiling and lay flowers on my grave and mean every tear. The silence after that went on for a long time. When Dumbledore spoke, the gentleness had thinned, and what came through it was old and vast and genuinely grieved, and underneath the tenderness immovable, and Harry understood that he was hearing, for the first time, the actual man. Everything you have said is true, Dumbledore said, and none of it changes what must happen. Yes, there is a fragment of Voldemort's soul within you. Yes, it must be destroyed, and I have found no way to destroy it that does not destroy its vessel. Yes, I raised you as I did, and I will not insult you by pretending the shaping was gentle or that I took no part in it. I told myself it was mercy to let you grow up without the weight of what you are. Perhaps it was cowardice. I have reached the age where the two are difficult to tell apart. His pale eyes held Harry's, and there was no twinkle in them now, only the terrible, weary certainty Aberforth had named. But hear me. Voldemort has torn his soul into pieces and scattered it, and while a single piece endures he cannot die, and while he cannot die he will unmake this world and everyone in it. You are one of those pieces. I did not choose that. His curse did on the night your mother's love turned it back on him. And I would give my life, this ruined life that is ending regardless, I would give it gladly to spare you what is coming, but I cannot. There is no version of the future in which Tom Riddle dies and Harry Potter lives, because the two of you are bound by his own magic into a single knot, and the knot is cut only one way. I am so sorry. I have been sorry for 16 years, but sorrow is not the same as being wrong. And there it was. The whole design, laid out at last in the old man's own voice, offered not as a trick but as a tragedy, and offered so well with such genuine feeling and such immovable conviction that Harry felt the pull of it, the old pull, the ache toward the kind hand that had shaped his whole life, the longing to believe that a man this stricken could not be doing something this monstrous. He held the pull as he held the doors in the dark of his head. He let it push against the wood, and he did not open. You're wrong about one thing, Harry said, and stood and did not raise his voice and did not soften it either. You said there's no version of the future where he dies and I live. You believe that because you've never once in your whole life been able to imagine a solution you didn't think of first. That's the flaw in you, Professor, not wickedness, certainty. You are so sure you've seen the whole board that you've stopped checking whether the board is bigger than you. I haven't decided yet whether you're right about the knot. But I've decided this, I'm not going to walk into any fire because you grieved me into it. If I die to end him, it'll be a thing I choose with my eyes open, having checked your work, and not a thing you arranged before I could talk. You raised a weapon, weapons don't get a vote, I'm giving myself one. And you're going to have to sit in that chair with your dying hand and your beautiful sorrow and let me. He walked to the door. Behind him, the silver instruments whirred, and Fawkes watched him with one dark ancient eye, and Albus Dumbledore said nothing at all because there was nothing he could say that Harry had not already predicted he would say, and both of them knew it, and the knowing was the whole of what had changed. At the door Harry stopped, not turning. You'll tell yourself I'll come round, he said. That I'll see there's no other way and do the noble thing and prove you were right to shape me all along. Hold on to that. It'll keep you comfortable. He opened the door. It'll also keep you from watching the board while I take it apart. Then he was gone down the moving stair into the castle full of old magic and one cold wrong note high on the 7th floor, and he did not look back, and behind him in the office at the top of the school, the most dangerous man in Britain sat alone with his ruined hand and for the first time in a very long life was not certain he could see the whole board after all. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Excision. The Chamber of Secrets smelled of old water and older death, and the basilisk lay where Harry had left it 4 years before, its vast body collapsed into itself, the great pale coils gone to leather over bone, the mouth still open on fangs the length of a man's forearm. He came down alone through the tunnel that hissed open at his command, and he brought with him 3 empty vials, a pair of dragonhide gloves he had bought under a false name in Nocturne Alley, and the certainty that had been assembling itself since Creature first set the locket in his palm. The weapon that could kill a soul fragment was not rare because it was hard to make. It was rare because almost no one who possessed it survived the possessing. A boy of 12 had stood in this chamber with a sword and a serpent, and had taken a fang through the arm and lived only because a phoenix wept into the wound. And that boy had walked away and never once thought to come back for the thing that had nearly killed him. Harry thought about it now with the cold, clean part of himself, and understood that he had been handed, at 12, the single most valuable object in his war against 2 immortals, and had left it lying in the dark for 4 years because no one had ever taught him to see what he was holding. He knelt by the ruined head and worked a fang loose from the jaw with the patience of a man who has learned that patience is the only thing that never betrays you. The venom had not dried. Basilisk venom did not dry. It was a magic as much as a poison, and it sat in the hollow of the fang gleaming faintly, and where a drop of it fell on the stone smoked and pitted. He filled the 3 vials with exquisite care, sealed them in lead, and drew 2 more fangs whole, wrapping them in dragon hide. And when he climbed back toward the girl's bathroom, he carried in his satchel enough death to end every anchor Tom Riddle had ever made. And the knowing of it sat in him like a stone dropped into a deep well, going down and not hitting bottom. He tested it that night in the ward heart under Grimald on the locket. Creature watched from the edge of the runelight with his enormous eyes fixed and dry. Harry set the locket on the black stone at the center of the circle, and he did not open it, and he took up a fang in his gloved hand, and he said quietly, because the moment deserved to be marked, Regulus, this is the part you couldn't do, watch. He drove the fang through the locket. The thing screamed, not with a mouth, it had no mouth. It screamed the way a struck bell screams, a note that went straight past the ears and into the teeth and the marrow, and the little golden doors of the locket burst open and a darkness poured out of it, a smoke that was not smoke, and in the smoke a shape gathered, a suggestion of a face handsome and cold and enormous, and it spoke in a voice made of everyone Harry had ever failed. It showed him Sirius falling. It showed him his parents' bodies. It showed him a version of himself, cruel and crowned and alone, and it told him that this was what he was becoming, that the old man had been right, that he was a weapon and weapons cannot love, and he would end as friendless as the thing that made him. It reached for the crooked door at the far end of his mind, kin calling to kin, and it pulled. Harry stood in the runelight and let it scream and let it show him everything and did not move, because he had built the floor for exactly this. He watched the cruel, crowned version of himself with the cold, clean attention he gave to everything now, and he found that the vision had no power, that he did not lend it, and he lent it none. The fang did its work. The darkness thinned, guttered, and went out, and the locket lay split and smoking and empty on the black stone, its fragment unmade, and the note that had sung in it for 15 years fell silent, and the silence rang. Harry crouched and looked at the ruined thing that had killed Regulus Black. It's done, he told Creature. Carry it to him when your time comes. Tell him a Black finished it. He'll want to know it was one of his own. The old elf made a sound that had no dignity in it at all, and Harry looked at the runes and gave him the moment, and did not name what he had heard, because some things are diminished by being named. He had his method now. He had proven the weapon, and he had proven something more important, which was that he could stand in the full scream of a soul fragment and not be moved, and both of those facts were required for the thing he meant to do to himself, and he had needed to know them before he risked the one experiment that could not be repeated if it failed. The diadem was harder to reach and easier to take. He went up to the 7th floor on the 3rd night after the chamber, past the tapestry of the trolls in their tutus, and he walked the blank stretch of wall 3 times with the thought held clear and cold in his mind. I need the place where things are hidden, and the door bloomed out of the stone, and he stepped through into the vast cathedral of lost and forbidden things that the castle had been swallowing for 1,000 years. He did not search. He had learned to feel for the note. It hung in the great junk cathedral like a single cold star in a sky of ordinary dark, and he walked to it through canyons of broken furniture and stacked contraband and the accumulated guilty leavings of 1,000 years of children, and he found it where it sat on the marble bust of some forgotten wizard, a tarnished tiara set with a dull blue stone, radiating the same folded hunger the locket had radiated, the same wrongness. The diadem of Ravenclaw with a piece of a murderer's soul curled inside it like a worm in fruit. He took it up in a gloved hand. He did not admire it. It had been beautiful once, 1,000 years ago, before Tom Riddle poured his rod into it, and Harry felt the old greatness of the thing under the corruption, the way you feel the shape of a drowned bell under still water, and he grieved for it a little, for the object, for the ruined marvel of it, and then he carried it out into the 7th floor corridor and did not destroy it yet, because he had a use for it first. Because the diadem, emptied, would make a vessel. And Harry, before he tried to burn the thing behind the crooked door, wanted somewhere for it to go that was not the open air of his own skull. He worked it out over a week of nights in the ward heart, laying the problem side by side as he laid everything, refusing to act until the whole of it was legible. A Horcrux was a fragment of soul anchored into a vessel by an act of murder and a rite of binding. Destroy the vessel and the fragment died, having nowhere to be. That was the crude way, the only way the books admitted, the way that worked for a locket or a diadem, and the way that had made Dumbledore certain for 16 years that the vessel behind Harry's scar could only be broken by breaking Harry. But a fragment anchored into a vessel could, in theory, be anchored into a different vessel, if you could offer it a berth and sever the old moorings faster than it could refuse. The books did not say so, because the books were written by men who studied Horcruxes in order to make them, and no maker had ever wanted to move his soul out of the safe thing and into a risky one. Harry did not want to make a Horcrux. He wanted to unmake one gently, the way you extract a hook from a fish you mean to keep alive, and the trick of it he saw at last, staring into the ruined marble runes at 3 in the morning with the whole house humming quiet along his nerves, was that he had 2 things no Horcrux maker had ever possessed at once. He had a will disciplined enough to hold the crooked door shut while the fragment behind it panicked. And he had a ward heart, an anchor of ancient blood magic bound to him and him alone, powerful enough to serve, for the length of a single terrible rite, as the strongest birth a fragment of soul had ever been offered. He would not move the fragment into the diadem. That was the feint he built to test the mechanics, and it taught him the shape of the thing. He would move it into the house itself, into the ward heart, into a magic that was his down to the last rune. And there, held in a berth built from his own blood and answerable to his own will, the fragment would have nowhere left to hide and no vessel left to protect it. And he would burn it with basilisk venom and a magic that belonged to him in a place that belonged to him on his own terms and no one else's. It was, he thought, the most dangerous thing anyone had attempted in a very long time. It was also the first act of his life that no one had arranged for him. Dumbledore had not thought of it. Voldemort had not thought of it. It had never been thought of because it required a person to be at once the vessel and the surgeon, the patient and the blade, and to trust his own discipline over the whole span of a rite in which any failure of will meant the fragment took him instead. He had spent his whole life being told what he could not do by men who profited from his not doing it. He found that he no longer took their word for anything. He told Hermione before he did it because he had promised himself he would learn the difference between using a person and trusting one, and because if the rite failed, he wanted one mind in the world to know the whole truth and not the version the old man would arrange. He brought her to Grimmauld on a Hogsmeade weekend through a route that lost the Order's watchers, and he took her down into the ward heart, and he told her everything in order the way Ragnarok had told him. The will, the vault, the prophecy, the Horcrux behind his scar, the design that required his death, and the rite he meant to perform to break the design. He gave her the certified copy of the memory. He let her hear the old man's own voice say so that at the right moment he can die. She was quiet for a long time when he finished, and Harry did not rush her because he had rushed no one to truth this large, and he was not going to start with the one person whose mind he needed whole. When she spoke, it was not what he had braced for. She did not weep and she did not accuse him of paranoia and she did not defend Dumbledore, and each thing she did not do told him he had brought her to it in the right order after all. You could be wrong about him, she said. About whether he'd have found another way. People who love you make terrible calculations sometimes, and it isn't always malice, sometimes it's just fear dressed up as certainty. She held up a hand before he could answer. I said you could be, I don't think you are. I've read the same books you have, Harry, I just never had a reason to read them the way you did. And I checked your ritual while you were talking in my head against everything I know, and the horrible thing, the thing I can't get around, is that it's sound. The soul anchor theory holds, the birth logic holds. I keep looking for the place where it kills you, and the place where it kills you is only if your will fails, and she said, looking at him with eyes bright and level, your will is the single most frightening thing I have ever encountered, and I've met a mountain troll and a basilisk and Bellatrix Lestrange. So, tell me what I hold and where I stand, and if it goes wrong, tell me now what you want done, because I will not stand in that circle wondering. I will need to already know. Harry looked at her, at the finest mind he knew brought whole and willing to the edge of the worst thing he had ever attempted, and he understood that he had just been given something Dumbledore had never once had in 60 years of holding all the strings, which was a person who saw the entire board and chose to stand on it beside him anyway, not managed into it, not shaped, not spent, freely, with her eyes open. You hold the venom, he said. And you stand outside the circle, no matter what you see or hear, because the circle is keyed to my blood, and if you cross it, you'll break the birth and the fragment goes free into the room with both of us in it. If it goes wrong, he said, and made himself say it plainly because she had asked plainly, if I stop being me, if the thing behind the door comes through and wears me, you take a fang and you end it, and you don't hesitate and you don't grieve until afterward, and you tell the world I died fighting Voldemort because that's true enough and because the alternative helps the old man. Can you do that? No, Hermione said. But I'll do it anyway, which is different and better and the only honest answer. Set up your circle, I've got the venom. She swallowed once and steadied. And Harry, don't you dare make me. He looked at her a moment longer than he meant to, because there was a thing worth marking and he had promised himself to stop letting the worth marking things pass unmarked. This was what the old man had never had. Dumbledore had commanded armies of the willing and had never once in 50 years stood in a room and handed another human being the whole truth and the power to end him and trusted them to choose well. He had loved people, Harry did not doubt it, but he had loved them the way a gardener loves a garden, tending and pruning and deciding, and he had died alone because a garden cannot love you back, only grow the shape you cut it to. Harry had done the opposite. He had brought the finest mind he knew into the worst danger of his life, given her every fact and every fear, and asked her to stand at the edge of a circle with a fang and a terrible instruction, and she had said no and meant yes, and the difference between those two answers was the difference between an instrument and a person, and he would rather fail with the person than succeed with the instrument. He thought Dumbledore would never have understood that. He thought it might be the only lesson worth taking from the whole ruin of the man, learned by watching him get it exactly wrong for 60 years. He did it on the night of the new moon, when the sky over Islington was starless and the house was at its darkest and strongest, and he descended into the ward heart with Hermione behind him and the diadem in one hand and a fang in the other, and the whole of his discipline will gathered like a held breath. He drew the circle in his own blood. Not much, enough. The runes of the house took it and woke as they had woken the first night, root feeding root, the arterial light running around the dome, and this time Harry did not merely offer the wards a form to fill. He asked the house for everything it had. He felt the ancient magic rise through him in a flood that dwarfed the first. An ocean, a cathedral of power poured through the narrow throat of one mortal will, and where it touched the organized dark of his mind it lit the whole architecture he had built there, the heavy doors, the plain room with its cold, clean table, the halls, all of it thrown into stark relief by a light that came from below the floor of the world. And at the far end where the scar's roots ran, the crooked door stood in the flood like a black scar on a burning wall, and the thing behind it felt the power come and understood at last that it was not a knock this time, it was a siege. The fragment threw the door open and came out to fight. It came the way the locket's fragment had come, in a pour of darkness and a gathering face, but this one was worse, because this one had lived in him for 16 years and it knew him the way a parasite knows the body it has ridden since birth. It did not show him strangers, it showed him himself. It wore his own voice. It told him in the register of his own thoughts so that he could not tell at first where he ended and it began. That he did not need to do this, that they were the same now, had always been the same, that the power he had tasted in this room was only a foretaste of what they could be together, that the old man was right and the world was cruel and only strength was real, and here, was strength beyond anything the old fools had ever let him touch. It offered him the crown it had shown him in the locket's vision, and this time it offered it not as a warning but as a promise, and it made the promise in his own beloved dead godfather's voice, and Harry felt the pull of it reach places the locket had never reached because the locket had been a stranger and this thing was, in the most literal and horrible sense, family. Harry held the door. He did not push it shut. You could not push shut a door with a hurricane coming through it. He did what he had learned to do with the grief and had never had to do at the scale, which was to stand in the full force of the thing and refuse to be moved by it, to let it scream in his own voice and wear his own dead and promise him his own crown, and to observe it coldly as he observed everything and to lend it nothing. You are not me, he told it in the plain room at the cold, clean table while the ocean roared. You are a wound I have carried and mistaken for myself. You are the last thing the old man built into me, the last string, the one he was surest of, and I am cutting it now, and I am cutting it with my eyes open, which is the one thing neither of you ever let me do. And then, for one endless suspended instant as he gathered the house's power to sever the anchor, the door stood all the way open and the connection ran both ways at full flood, and Harry looked through it. He saw Voldemort, not a vision sent to trap him. The raw thing, the mind on the other end of the wound, and it was screaming, because it had felt the locket die 3 nights before and it was feeling something worse now, feeling the peace in the vessel strain against its moorings, and for the first time in the creature's long deathless existence it knew terror. And in its terror it did what a mind does when it is cornered, it ran to the things it had hidden to reassure itself they were safe, and Harry, riding the open door, went with it. A cup gold and small in a deep vault behind a dragon, a ring cracked in a ruined shack, a great snake coiled and warm and alive, closer to its master than any of the rest, a cave by the sea where a locket should have been and was not. Harry saw them all in the space between 2 heartbeats, the whole hidden architecture of Tom Riddle's deathlessness laid bare by Tom Riddle's own terror, and he took the map and he held it, and then he did the thing that closed the door forever. He severed the anchor. The house's power came down like a blade the size of the sky. It did not cut the fragment. It cut the fragment's hold, the 1,000 fine roots by which it had grown into him over 16 years, and it cut them all at once cleanly in a magic older than the men who had called such magic evil. And the fragment came loose with a wrench that Harry felt in every rune of the house and every nerve of his body, torn free of the soul it had ridden, and it howled and it reached for anything to anchor to and found only the birth Harry had built for it, the ward heart, his blood, his house, his will. A birth from which there was no door out at all. The connection to Voldemort broke. The far end of the wound sealed as the near end emptied, and the screaming mind on the other side vanished as though a phone had been hung up in a distant room, and Harry knew with the certainty of the house singing it through him that Tom Riddle had just gone blind and deaf in the one direction he had spied through for 16 years, and did not yet understand why. The fragment thrashed in the ward heart, cornered, formless, a knot of stolen wool with no roots and no vessel and nowhere to flee. Now, Harry said, and his voice came out of him with the whole house behind it and it did not shake, Hermione, now. She threw him the fang across the circle without crossing it, exactly as told, and he caught it out of the arterial light, and he drove it into the heart of the thrashing fragment where it hung caught in his own magic. And the basilisk venom did to a piece of Voldemort's soul what it had done to the locket. And the thing screamed its last in a voice that was, at the very end, no longer Harry's and no longer Sirius's and no longer anyone's. Just a cold and shrunken hate guttering out, and then it was gone. The ocean of the house's power receded. The runes dimmed from arterial red to their steady deep glow. And Harry knelt in the center of the circle in the sudden ringing quiet with his own blood drying on the stone in his own mind, for the first time in 16 years entirely his own, no crooked door at the far end of it, no cold thread, no listening thing behind his eyes. The silence in his own skull was so total that it took him a moment to recognize it as silence, because he had never once in all his life heard it before. He put his hand to his scar. It was only a scar now, old, faded, a mark on skin, nothing behind it but bone. Hermione was across the circle with a hand pressed to her mouth and the second fang forgotten in her other fist, and her face was wet, and she was watching him with a question she could not make herself ask, and Harry answered it before she could. "It's me," he said. "It's still me, it worked." He heard his own voice in the ringing quiet, and it was steady, and it was his, only his, and he said it again because saying it made it real. "It's still me." She crossed the circle then because the danger was past and the keying was spent, and she did not embrace him because they were not those people, but she gripped his shoulder hard enough to bruise and held it, and neither of them said anything for a while, and Creature from the edge of the runelight wept without shame for the second time that month. He destroyed the diadem before he slept. There was no ritual to it now, no siege, only a tired young man and a fang and a tarnished tiara on a black stone. And when the venom went in, the thing screamed its bell scream and poured out its darkness and died, and the ancient marvel of Ravenclaw's lost crown was free at last of the rot a schoolboy named Riddle had poured into it half a century before. Harry set the ruined thing aside with something close to gentleness. 4 fragments gone now, counting the one that had lived in him. The diary Voldemort had never known was destroyed, the locket, the diadem, and the piece behind the crooked door. The creature had made his soul into a thing of 7s, and Harry had unmade 4 of the 7 in a single autumn, and the arithmetic of that pleased the cold, clean part of him the way a balanced ledger pleased Ragnarok. Harry sat up the rest of that night with the map Voldemort's terror had given him and drew it out on parchment in a hand no one else would read. A cup behind a dragon, a ring in a ruin, a snake at the master's side. 3 anchors left, and the master himself, and Harry now held the single most dangerous piece of intelligence in the war, taken not by spy or torture, but by riding an enemy's fear through a door he had then sealed forever behind him. And he understood, watching the ink dry, that the whole shape of everything had changed in the ward heart tonight, and not only for him. Dumbledore's design was dead, not weakened, dead. The entire architecture, the cupboard and the closed doors and the withheld prophecy and the grateful boy raised to walk into fire, all of it had been built to deliver one moment, a willing sacrifice, Harry offering his own life to kill the fragment inside him because there was no other way. There had been another way. Harry had found it alone, in a room the old man did not know existed. Using a magic the old man had spent his life teaching the world to fear. The keystone had been pulled. Every other piece of the design, the order, the Wisengamot, the whole patient machine had been mortar around that one stone, and the stone was gone, and the old man did not yet know it, and would not know it until he reached for the moment he had spent 16 years preparing and found the moment already spent by the hand of the weapon he had believed he understood. Harry set down the quill. Somewhere to the north, in a castle full of old magic, an old man with a dying hand sat over his silver instruments, and one of those instruments, Harry did not doubt, was keyed to the child from the cupboard and had been for 16 years, measuring his life and his blood in the tethered thing behind his scar. Harry wondered what it had done tonight, that instrument, at the moment the fragment died, whether it had stopped, whether it had shattered. Whether in a dark office a needle had swung once hard and fallen still, and an old man had woken from a doze and gone to it and read it and not understood not yet what he was reading. He would understand soon. And there was nothing now that he could do about it, because the thing he would have done, the thing the whole design existed to make possible, could no longer be done. Because the piece it required was ash on a stone in Islington, and the vessel it required to break was sitting whole and free and finally entirely his own, drawing a map of an enemy's secrets by the steady glow of a house that answered to no gatekeeper alive. Outside the small window the starless dark began very faintly to gray toward morning. Harry rolled the map and sealed it and set it in the lead box where the empty locket had been, and climbed the stair out of the ward heart into the ordinary house in the ordinary dawn, whole, unleashed, and awake in his own quiet skull for the first time in the whole of his remembered life. The 5th expansion of the Registry of Proscribed Arts came before the Wisengamot 10 days later, and Harry attended it in person in his own name for the first time ever. He had planned the entrance as he planned everything, which was to say he had planned it to be no entrance at all. He did not sweep in, he did not announce himself. He walked into the vast tiered chamber under the enchanted ceiling among the last of the arriving members, in the plain dark robes of a lord with old seats to fill, and he took the Potter's seat, and then, because the point had to be made, he took the 3 black seats beside it, filling 4 empty places in a single quiet motion, and he sat and he waited for the room to notice. It noticed by degrees. A murmur started in the press gallery and climbed the tiers, heads turned. Somewhere a quill snapped. And high in the Chief Warlock's chair, in his plum robes with the ruined hand folded from sight, Albus Dumbledore looked down across the chamber and found, sitting openly in seats that had been silent for 15 years, in seats whose votes he had held in his own 2 hands for a decade and a half, the grieving, compliant schoolboy he believed he was managing. Their eyes met across the length of the chamber. Harry did not perform grief. He did not perform anything. He let the old man look at him and see, for the first time, nothing arranged, nothing curated, no window dressed for a search, only a young lord in his rightful seats with his hands loose on his knees and the whole cold, clean architecture of him plainly, finally, on display. Dumbledore's face did not change. But he did not begin the session for a moment longer than the order of business required, and in that moment Harry read the whole of what the old man was calculating, and understood that the calculating had for once no answer prepared. The measure was read. Amelia Bones spoke against it precisely, as Harry had known she would, laying out in her flat law officer's voice the curious priority of forbidding people to defend their own minds in the middle of a war, and the discretion the licensing committee would hold, and the name of the wizard who would chair that committee. She did not look at Harry once while she spoke, which was its own kind of eloquence, because a woman who had been recruited would have looked, and Amelia Bones had not been recruited, only informed, and was acting on the fact rather than on the man, exactly as Harry had built it. When the vote came, Harry cast for. He did not make a speech. He had considered a speech and discarded it, because a speech was a thing the old man could answer, and Harry did not intend this first time to give him anything to answer. He simply raised his hand against the measure and cast the Potter vote and the three black votes, four voices where for 15 years there had been silence Dumbledore could count on, and around the chamber he watched the effect of it ripple outward, because a vote is never only a vote. It is a signal to everyone watching about where the weight has moved. The old families who had sat on the fence for a decade, waiting to see which way the ancient houses leaned, saw the Potter in the black seats leaning hard against the chief warlock's measure, and a handful of them quietly leaned the same way because that is how power actually works, not in speeches but in the brave, unglamorous arithmetic of people deciding they are no longer the only one. The measure failed by 6 votes. 4 of them were Harry's. The other 2 had been waiting 15 years for the ancient houses to give them cover, and Harry had just given it. It was, by the standards of the war raging outside the chamber, nothing. A committee not formed, a ban not passed, a single procedural defeat in a body that met 100 times a year. But Albus Dumbledore had not lost a vote of consequence in the Wisengamot in longer than most of its members had been alive, and every soul in that chamber knew it, and they filed out afterward talking not about the registry but about the fact that the chief warlock had been beaten in his own chamber on his own measure, and that the hand that beat him had belonged to a 17-year-old in plain robes who had not said a single word. Harry left among the crowd as quietly as he had come. In the great marble atrium he passed close enough to Dumbledore to speak, and the old man turned to him with the warmth already assembled on his face, the grandfatherly reproach, the gentle Harry, I did not know you meant to take up your seats, you might have told me, we might have spoken first, and Harry stopped and looked at him and did not assemble anything on his own face at all. You held those votes for 15 years, Harry said, pitched low for the 2 of them. You never once told me I had them, I had to learn it from a goblin. He let that sit. I'm going to be in that chamber every session now, Professor, in my own seats, voting my own votes. You'll have to win the room the honest way from here, the way everyone else does, by being right in front of people who are allowed to disagree with you. I know that's new, I know you've forgotten how, take your time. He walked on before the warmth could find its answer, out through the golden atrium into the grey London afternoon, and behind him the most powerful wizard in Britain stood among the emptying crowd with his ruined hand and his unanswered face, and felt the floor of 50 years shift half an inch beneath him, and could not, in front of all those watching eyes, show that he had felt it. Voldemort felt his losses in the dark, and did what the cornered always do, which is lash out at the nearest soft thing to prove to himself he is still strong. Harry felt it coming before the news did, not through the old wound, which was sealed now and silent, but through the ordinary channels of a war he had learned to hear he had built himself. The certified whispers Amelia let fall, the movements of aurors, the shape of a map read by a mind that had learned to read maps. A raid. A village on the Welsh border with 3 known members of the Order living quietly in it, chosen not for its value but for its softness, because a creature that has felt 3 anchors of its immortality die in a single autumn needs very badly to make someone else afraid. Harry went, not because the Order had asked. The Order did not know he could feel the war moving at all now, along senses he had built for himself. He went because a raid was a set piece, and a set piece was a place to be seen being something other than a schoolboy, and because he had stopped being willing to let people die on a schedule set by old men who believed they owned him. He arrived over the burning village as the Death Eaters were finishing, and he came down out of the smoke like a judgment, and the magic he brought was the house's magic and the chambers and the forbidden shelves, wandless where it needed to be, wordless where speech would only warn, precise where the ministry taught only brute force. He did not duel them as a schoolboy duels spell against spell. He took the ground itself, as a lord takes his own wards, and turned it against them, and the cobbles rose and the smoke thickened and the shadows learned his will, and 3 masked murderers who had come to frighten farmers found themselves fighting a village that had, without warning, decided to fight back through the hands of a single unhurried figure in plain dark robes. It was a strange and terrible thing to watch, the villagers said afterward when they could say anything at all. The fire that the Death Eaters had set did not spread, it hung where it was held as though the night had decided the burning was finished. The smoke moved against the wind. A hurled curse of sick green light met a wall of risen cobblestone that had not been there an instant before and broke against it like surf on rock. And through all of it the figure did not run and did not shout and barely seemed to move, and yet everywhere a wand turned toward him the world was already wrong for the caster, the footing gone, the light guttered, the shadow at his back suddenly full of teeth. There was no fury in it, that was the part that stayed with them. Whatever had come down out of the smoke to save them fought with the unhurried economy of a man rearranging a room, and the rearranging left 3 of the Dark Lords chosen weeping in the mud with their wands and splinters, and it had cost the figure, from all any witness could tell, no more effort than the drawing of a slow breath. He did not kill them. He had thought about it coldly and decided against it, not from mercy but from strategy, because a corpse tells no tales and a survivor tells exactly the tale you want told. He broke their wands and their nerve, and left them bound in the village square for the Aurors with their masks removed and their faces bare, and he was gone before the Order's response team arrived, and the surviving villagers could say only that something had come out of the smoke and saved them and had worn no mask and answered to no name. By morning the story was in the Prophet, garbled and enormous, a hooded avenger, a third power in the war, a figure that fought like nothing the Ministry trained and killed no one and left Death Eaters gift-trapped in a burning square. Voldemort read it and understood that his lashing out had produced not terror but a rival. Dumbledore read it and understood that the weapon he had built for one purpose was loose in the war on purposes of its own. And Harry read it over breakfast in the Great Hall among 1,000 chattering students, and folded the paper, and passed the marmalade to Ron and said nothing at all, because the whole art of it now was that no one watching him eat his toast could connect the grieving quiet seventh year to the thing that had come out of the smoke. And no one did, and that was exactly the shape he wanted the world to hold while he took the last of it apart. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The board overturned. Snape found him on the second Tuesday of October in the empty Transfiguration corridor after curfew, and delivered the news as he delivered everything now flatly as a report from a man who had stopped pretending to be anything but an instrument aimed where he chose. He has called the order, Snape said. Friday, Grimmauld Place, which he still believes is his to summon them to. He means to tell them a great deal that he has kept from them in his own careful order, and I have been given my lines. The black eyes were steady. He will tell them there is a piece of the Dark Lord's soul that must be destroyed before the war can end, and that the destroying will require a terrible sacrifice, freely given, and that the sacrifice is you, and that his heart breaks to ask it, and that he has spent your whole life protecting you toward this one dreadful necessity. He will weep, Potter. He weeps very well, and he will bind them to it with their love for you, so that when the hour comes, it will not be Albus Dumbledore asking you to die. It will be everyone you have ever trusted standing in a circle asking together with tears for the greater good. Harry stood in the dark corridor and turned it over and found at the center of it the old man's genius laid bare one last time. It was a masterstroke. It did not fight Harry's independence, it used it. It could not put the leash back on, so it built a new one out of the hands of everyone Harry loved. And it did it in the language of love and necessity, so that any refusal would look like cowardice and any resistance like the very hardness Dumbledore had warned him against in the orchard. The old man had felt the weapon slip his grasp, and rather than chase it, he had moved to surround it. Every stone laid true, every apology a wall. He doesn't know, Harry said. It was not a question, but he checked it against Snape's face anyway because a wrong assumption here would cost everything. He doesn't know the piece is already gone. He suspects something changed. One of his instruments broke in September. He has told no one, but I have seen the empty place on the shelf where it stood for 16 years. Snape's mouth thinned. He does not know what you did. He cannot imagine it, because to imagine it he would first have to imagine that a solution existed which he had not found, and that is the one thought Albus Dumbledore has never in his life been able to complete. So he proceeds as though the sacrifice is still required, because in his mind it must be, because he is the one who would have known otherwise. Good, Harry said. Then he's about to stand in a room and ask a dozen people to help him talk me into a death that stopped being necessary a month ago. And he doesn't know it's stopped. That's not a meeting, Professor, that's a stage. He's built it and lit it and invited an audience, and he's going to walk out onto it certain he's the only one who knows the script. He looked at Snape. Let's change the script before he arrives. Here's what you're going to carry to the meeting, and here's who you're going to hand it to and when. The order gathered in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place on Friday night as it had gathered 100 times, and Harry led it, because the house was his and the house would tell him everything that passed in it, and because a man who owns the stage need not stand on it to control the play. He was not in the kitchen. He was 2 floors up in the drawing room with Creature beside him and the whole house singing quiet along his nerves, and he felt them arrive one by one and take their places along the house's nerves. Moody's wooden thud, Tonks's clumsy warmth, Kingsley's deep calm, Remus Lupin thin and grey and tired, Molly and Arthur the rest. And he felt Dumbledore arrive last, as the powerful always arrive last, and take the head of the table in a house he did not own, and begin, in the warm grave voice, to build his cathedral of necessity. Harry did not need to hear the words. He had written the counter to them before a single one was spoken. As Dumbledore reached the heart of it, the terrible sacrifice, the piece of soul, the freely given death, Severus Snape rose from his place at the table, and instead of speaking his assigned lines, he set upon the scrubbed wood 3 things: a certified copy of the last will of James and Lily Potter open to the clause in Lily's own hand, a certified transcript of 15 years of the Chief Warlock's votes laid year beside year, and a single stoppered vial of silver memory unlabeled. Before we are asked to help send a child to his death, Snape said, into the sudden silence, the order should perhaps hear in his own voice what its leader said to me about that child 16 years ago. Minerva, there is a pensive in the study. Fetch it. I think we had all better look. Harry, 2 floors up, felt the meeting change its shape. He felt it as he had felt a curse turn in the air of the burning village, the whole configuration of the room tilting at once. And he sat quiet in the drawing room with his hands loose on his knees and let it happen without him, because the most powerful thing he could do, the one thing Dumbledore would never have done in his place, was to not be there. To let the truth stand in the room on its own feet and be weighed by people he had trusted with it, rather than delivered by his own mouth where it could be called revenge. He had learned that from the old man's every mistake. Dumbledore had spent 50 years being the only one who saw the whole board, and it had made him the only one anyone could blame or thank or follow. Harry meant to be a different kind of power. He meant to give people the board and let them play it, and trust that people handed the truth in the right order would reach the right end without being driven to it, and if he was wrong about that, then he was no better than the old man and deserved to lose. He was not wrong. He felt Minerva McGonagall come out of the memory white and shaking, the splinter he had planted in September driven now to the bone. He felt Moody's cold professional fury, the settled and dangerous quiet of a man who had been lied to by a commander and knew exactly what that was worth. He felt Lupin, who had loved James and Lily, sit with his head in his hands. And he felt at the head of the table Albus Dumbledore rise to answer and answer well, because the old man was never better than when the ground gave way beneath him. Harry did go down then, not to fight, to witness and to be seen witnessing, so that whatever the old man built in his defense would have to be built in front of the one person it could not fool. He came into the kitchen and stood in the doorway, and the order turned to look at him, a dozen faces he had known for years, and on every one of them was a question they had never thought to ask before Friday night, and Dumbledore stood at the head of the table with the certified pages before him and the empty pensive at his elbow and his ruined hand no longer hidden, and he looked at Harry with something that was almost relief, as though he had been waiting all along. For the person who could finally hold the whole weight of it with him. "You have been busy," Dumbledore said quietly. "I did not know about the will. That is a lie. I knew about the will. I sealed the will. I have simply not thought about the will in 15 years, which is worse. And I did not know you had my words from Severus. I should have. You have been 3 moves ahead of me since the summer, and I have been telling myself it was morning, because morning was a thing I knew how to manage, and the truth is I did not want to see what you had become, because what you have become is the one thing I spent my life ensuring no one could be, someone I cannot predict." He looked around the table at the fractured faces of the people who had followed him for a decade. "Ask me your questions, all of you. I will not weep this time." I find I have lost the taste for it in front of him. It should have been the moment the old man broke. It was not, and Harry had known it would not be because Aberforth had told him the truth in the Hog's Head, and the truth was that you could not beat Albus Dumbledore by showing him he was wrong. You could only beat him by taking away the things his wrongness stood on. So Harry let the old man answer the Order's questions, and he answered them with a terrible honesty, conceding everything, defending nothing that could not be defended. And by the end of the night half the Order was in tears and all of it was in doubt, and Dumbledore had, through sheer force of sorrowful candor, very nearly turned his own exposure into a kind of tragic absolution. Very nearly. Harry watched him do it and admired it coldly, and then he took it apart with a single sentence, delivered from the doorway as the old man reached the crescendo of his beautiful contrition. "He's not telling you the part that matters," Harry said. The room went still. "He's confessing to everything he did to me, and he's doing it beautifully, and every one of you is starting to forgive him because that's what the confession is for. It's not an apology, it's the last move. He can't control me anymore, so he's making himself so pitiable that you'll do his controlling for him, out of love for a sorry old man, the same way he was going to make you send me to die out of love for me." He stepped into the room. "So here's the part he's leaving out, the sacrifice he called necessary, the death he spent my life preparing me for. It isn't necessary, it stopped being necessary in September. There was another way, and I found it alone, using magic he had banned, and the piece of soul he told you had to be destroyed by killing me is already destroyed, and I'm standing here whole, and he didn't even know until his instrument broke on his shelf and he chose not to mention it to any of you." He let that land. "He's been building a case tonight for sacrifice that can't be made because the thing it required no longer exists. And he knew or half knew, and he called this meeting anyway, because a man who needs to be needed cannot bear to discover that the tragedy he organized his whole life around has quietly resolved itself without him. That's not wickedness. Aberforth's right, it's not wickedness. It's a good man who cannot stop being the center of the story even when the story no longer needs him. And you've all been following the story, not the man, the story he tells about the man. I'm here to tell you the story's over." The silence after that was the sound of a decade of loyalty coming apart at its joints. It was Moody who broke it, because it was always Moody who said the thing no one else would. "I've followed you into 3 wars, the old Auror said, his magical eye fixed and unblinking on the man at the head of the table. "I've killed on your say-so and buried friends on your say-so and told myself every time that Albus knew things I didn't, that the picture was bigger than my piece of it. And it was. That's the trick of it, isn't it? It always was bigger than my piece. You made sure of that. You made sure no one ever held more than a piece, so no one could ever check your arithmetic." He planted his staff on the flagstones. "Constant vigilance. I used to tell the young ones, I never once thought to point it at you. That's on me, but it's on you that I didn't have to." Minerva McGonagall did not shout. She had come out of the pensive white to the lips, and when she spoke her Scottish came through hard and cold. "I sat on a garden wall as a cat for a full day, Albus, and I told you those were the worst people in England to give that child to, and you told me there was a reason, and I trusted the reason because it was you. I have trusted the reason my whole life because it was you." Her voice did not break, she would not permit it. "And the reason was that you needed him kept small and grateful and alone, so that when you asked him to die he would say yes. I taught that child. I taught him for 6 years and I was proud of him, and the whole time you were counting the days until you could spend him. I do not know you. I have worked beside you for 30 years and I find tonight that I never knew you at all." Remus Lupin lifted his head from his hands, and he was the worst of them because there was no anger in him, only a grief so old and tired it had gone quiet. "James would have died for you," he said. "Lily did die for him, and you took what she died to protect and you catalogued it as an asset. I can't." He stood unsteady. "I can't sit at this table. I'm sorry, not to you, to him." And he looked at Harry and inclined his head and walked out into the London night, and one by one, not all at once, others rose to follow, and the Order of the Phoenix came apart at the seams that Albus Dumbledore himself had sown. Because a thing held together by one man's secrets cannot survive the day the secrets are laid on the table. And Albus Dumbledore, at the head of a table in a house that was not his, looked at Harry with his pale, piercing eyes and did not deny a word of any of it, because there was nothing to deny, and the not denying was the end of him in that room. They moved against the chief warlockship the following week, and Harry did it in the open in the Wisengamot, because some things had to be done where everyone could see them or they would be undone in the dark. He did not bring the motion himself. He had learned that lesson too. He gave the evidence to Amelia Bones, who brought it as director of magical law enforcement, which made it a matter of law and not of grievance, and he gave the emotional weight to the fractured order, who came and sat in the gallery with their doubt written on their faces, and he took his 4 seats and said for the length of the whole proceeding almost nothing, because his silence now carried more than his voice, and he had learned the value of a thing withheld. Amelia laid the years side by side. She did it as she did everything, without heat, in the flat, precise voice of a woman reading evidence into a record, and the evidence was the certified voting ledger and the sealed will, and at the last played into the great chamber from a pensive charm to project, the old man's own voice in his own office saying the words that could not be argued with. I have watched over him these many years for one reason, so that at the right moment he can die. The chamber heard the most trusted wizard in Britain describe, in his own voice, the raising of a child as a sacrifice, and something happened in that room that had not happened in 50 years. The trust broke, not into anger at first, into silence. The silence of 500 years of collective certainty, discovering it had been resting its whole weight on a single man's judgment, and that the man had judged at least once that a child's life was a resource to be spent. Then the questions came, and they came from the last quarter Dumbledore would have chosen. It was not the reformers who turned on him first. The reformers had never trusted him, and their opposition cost nothing and moved no one. It was the old families, the deep conservative center of the chamber, the wizards who had backed his every measure for a generation, who rose one after another with faces gone gray. An ancient witch of a house older than the ministry stood and asked, in a voice like dry paper, whether the chief warlock had used the seal of the Wisengamot to override a lawful will, and did not sit until he had answered, and his answer was yes. A stout wizard who had chaired 3 committees at Dumbledore's request asked whether there were other seals, other overridings, other quiet necessities they had voted through on his word without ever seeing the whole of what they voted, and Dumbledore was silent, and the silence was its own answer, and the stout wizard sat down very slowly and did not look at the man he had followed for 30 years. Harry watched it move through the tears like cold water finding the cracks in a wall, and he understood that he was watching not a trial but an awakening, 500 people discovering all at once that they had spent their lives handing their judgment to one man and calling the handing wisdom. Dumbledore rose to speak in his own defense, and he gave the speech of his life. He did not deny the evidence. He was far too clever to deny the evidence. He stood in the well of the chamber with his ruined, blackened hand held up for all of them to see, the wound of a man dying by inches, and he told them the truth as he understood it, and the truth as he understood it was magnificent and terrible and very nearly enough. He told them of a prophecy and a dark lord who could not die. He told them of the pieces of a torn soul and the world that would burn if a single piece endured. He told them that he had made a choice no one should have to make, to raise one child toward one death in order to spare 100,000, and that he had hated the choice every day of 16 years, and that he would make it again because the arithmetic of it did not change for being cruel, and that history would judge him monstrous and history would be wrong because monstrousness was doing evil for its own sake, and he had done evil only ever for the good it bought. It was the doctrine of his whole life, spoken plainly at last, for the greater good, stripped of its gentleness and standing in the open in all its cold cathedral grandeur. And for a moment the chamber wavered, because it is a seductive thing, the promise that the ends can wash the means clean, and half the wizards in that room wanted to believe it, because believing it would let them keep the man they had trusted. Harry rose then, once, briefly. He had prepared no speech, because a prepared speech was a thing Dumbledore could have answered, and he wanted to give the old man nothing to answer. You keep saying there was no other way, Harry said into the wavering chamber, and his voice was quiet, and it carried because the room had gone silent to hear him. I want everyone here to notice that. He didn't lie to you tonight. He believes there was no other way. He believed it so completely that he built a boy's whole life around a death, and banned the magic that might have offered an alternative, and never once went looking for the alternative, because looking would have meant admitting he might not already know the answer. He looked at Dumbledore across the well of the chamber, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not soften it. There was another way. I'm standing in it. The sacrifice you called necessary was made unnecessary a month ago by a 17-year-old with a stolen library and a magic you'd have had me arrested for using. That's the whole case against him. Not that he's cruel. He's not cruel. It's that he decided 50 years ago that he was the only one who could be trusted to see the whole board, and he was so sure of it that when the board turned out to be bigger than him, he'd have burned a child rather than admit it. You don't need to hate him. You just need to stop handing him the board, that's all this vote is. It's not about whether he's good, it's about whether any one man, however good, should ever again hold everything in his two hands. I think you know the answer, I think you've known it for years and let him have it anyway because he always had a reason. Have a reason of your own this once. He sat down, he said nothing further. He had given the chamber a fact and a question and nothing it could argue with, and then he had returned his hands to his knees and let the room decide, because a room that decides for itself will defend its decision, and a room that is told what to think will resent the telling the moment the teller's back is turned. He had watched Dumbledore make that mistake for a lifetime. He did not intend to inherit it along with the old man's chair. The count itself was a slow and terrible thing to sit through. It began close because habit is strong and 50 years of deference does not fall in an hour, and the first tally had the fence-sitters clustered where fence-sitters always cluster, on the side of the man who had always won. Then the certified ledger did its work in the minds of people who had time now to read it, and the sealed will did its work, and the old man's own recorded voice did the worst work of all, and the wizards of the second tally began to move. Harry watched them move. He had learned the shape of it in the registry vote, and he watched it repeat at greater scale, the brave, unglamorous arithmetic, each defection making the next one cheaper, until a thing that had been unthinkable at the start of the session was, by the end of it, merely the obvious reading of the evidence. No one wanted to be the last wizard in Britain still defending a man who had raised a child to die, and so they did not stay last. They moved in ones and twos and then in a rush, and the margin that had opened at 6 votes widened to 20 and to 50, and to a number that no one bothered to announce precisely because its precision no longer mattered. The Wisengamot of Britain, for the first time in living memory, weighed the word of Albus Dumbledore and found it wanting, and stripped him of the chief warlockship, and the enchanted ceiling of the ancient chamber showed a grey autumn sky indifferent to all of it, as ceilings and skies are. Dumbledore did not fight the count. He stood in the well of the chamber and watched the office he had held for a generation lifted from him. And when it was done he inclined his head once to the body that had removed him, with a dignity that was somehow worse than any protest, and he gathered his ruined hand into his sleeve and walked out of the chamber alone, and the crowd parted for him out of an old habit of reverence that was already, even as they made way, beginning to curdle into something else. Harry watched him go and felt no triumph, which surprised him, and he examined the absence of triumph as he examined everything and understood it. You do not triumph over the fall of a great thing. You only make sure it falls the right way, onto the design and not onto the people the design used, and then you stand in the wreckage and get to work, because the falling was never the point. The falling was only the clearing of ground. He found Dumbledore afterward in the empty atrium by the fountain of the magical brethren, the golden wizard and the fawning creatures, and the old man was looking up at it with an expression Harry could not read. An ugly thing, isn't it? Dumbledore said without turning. The wizard and the grateful lesser creatures gazing up. I helped design its replacement once after the last one was destroyed. I thought I would make something truer. I never did. One never does. One means to build something truer, and one builds another version of the same thing because one is, at bottom, the same person who built the first. He turned then, and his pale eyes were very tired, and the ruin had spread past his wrist now, black threading up toward the elbow. You were magnificent in there. I mean that without bitterness. I have been beaten perhaps 3 times in my long life, and each time by someone I underestimated, and each time I told myself it was the last, and each time I was wrong, and here you are the 4th, and you are the only one who beat me without hating me, which is why you won. Hatred I know how to use, it gives a man a handle. You never gave me one. I know about the wand, Harry said. The atrium was very quiet. Water fell in the fountain. Dumbledore went still, the particular stillness Harry had learned to read as confirmation. The Elder Wand, Harry said, the Death Stick. You won it from Grindelwald in the duel the world calls the greatest of the age, and you've carried it ever since, and it's the most powerful wand that has ever existed, and it's the last tool you have that I haven't taken. I'm the heir of Peveril, Professor. Ragnarok told me the name would make certain people go very still and told me not to speak it until I understood why. I understand why now. There's a children's story, Harry went on, and his quiet voice rang clear in the empty marble. 3 brothers who met Death on a road and cheated him at a river, and Death, pretending to be a good loser, gave them each a gift, an unbeatable wand, a stone to call back the dead, a cloak to hide even from Death himself. Every wizarding child hears it. Almost none of them noticed that the brothers had a name, and the name was Peveril, and the youngest brother's cloak has come down, father to son, unbroken for 8 centuries to a family called Potter. I've worn it since I was 11. I never once wondered why a school cloak outlasted every other object I owned, or why it never wore thin, or why nothing I ever cast could damage it, because no one taught me to see what I was holding. You knew. You borrowed it the year my parents died, and you gave it back, and you never said a word about what it was, because a boy who knew he held a hallow might have started asking about the other 2. He watched that land. You spent your youth hunting all 3 for the greater good, you and Grindelwald, master of death, remaking the world. Ariana died and you buried the hunt with her, or told yourself you had. And then Grindelwald took the wand, and you had to beat him for it in the end anyway, and you've held it 50 years and told the world you keep it locked away out of caution. You don't keep it out of caution. You keep it because you never stopped being the ambitious youth who wanted to be master of death. You just got better at pretending the wanting was duty. The wand is a hallow. It was made, the story says, by Death, or by Peveril clever enough to make people believe it was Death, which comes to the same power in the end. And you meant to use it one last time, not on Voldemort, on the story. You meant to die with it undefeated so that its power would break with you, so that the most dangerous object in the world would go quietly into the ground with the last man wise enough to hold it. That was your final act of stewardship. Control even in dying, especially in dying. Yes, Dumbledore said softly, that was the plan, it was a good plan. It was, Harry agreed, but it's the same plan as all your plans, you alone deciding for everyone, holding the last string even past the grave, and I'm done letting you hold strings. He drew his own wand, the ordinary holly and phoenix feather that had chosen him at 11, and Dumbledore's eyebrows rose a fraction because it was not a threat, it was too casual for a threat, and Harry saw him fail to predict it, which was the whole point. Disarm, Harry said almost gently. Fight me or don't, it doesn't matter. If you fight me and lose, the wand is mine by conquest. If you don't fight me and simply let me take it, the wand is mine by surrender, which the old lore says counts just as well. Either way, the Elder Wand changes hands tonight from you to me, and your beautiful plan to die with it undefeated dies instead because you've already been defeated in a chamber in front of everyone an hour ago. The wand felt it. Wands of that kind always do. And Albus Dumbledore looked at the young man his design had made, the weapon that had turned into a player, the one person in 60 years who had beaten him without hating him and now stood offering him the choice between a duel he would lose and a surrender he could not refuse. And something moved across the tired, ruined face that Harry had never seen there before and would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It might have been sorrow, it might have been pride. It might, at the very end of a life spent holding everything, have been something as simple and as unfamiliar as relief. He raised the Elder Wand, and then slowly, deliberately, he turned it in his hand and held it out across the space between them, gripped first and laid it in Harry's palm and let go. There, Dumbledore said, it is done. The most dangerous object in the world, in the hands of the one person I have ever met who might not be corrupted by it, because he took everything from me and did not once enjoy it. He lowered his ruined hand. Voldemort is coming, Harry. He knows the wand exists. He has been hunting its history for a year. He will come for it, and now it is you must come to, and I cannot help you because I am dying and because I have finally, tonight, run out of board to sea. You are on your own in the way you have wanted to be on your own since the summer. I hope it is everything you thought it would be. I hope more than that, that when it is over you find you are still able to love someone, because that was the one thing my greater good never left room for, and it is, I have come to think at the very end, the only thing that was ever worth protecting. He walked away across the atrium, a stooped figure with a dying hand, out of the story he had run for 50 years, and Harry stood by the ugly fountain with the Elder Wand cold and heavy and singing in his grip, and understood that the board was overturned at last, every piece of the old design in ruins around him, and that only one thing remained standing between him and the free, formidable life he had torn out of two immortals' hands. The fall of Albus Dumbledore did not steady the wizarding world. It did the opposite, and Harry had known it would, and had weighed the cost and judged it worth paying, because a rotten beam does not become sound by being left in place, and a house braced on one man is a house one death from collapse, whether the death comes tonight or in 10 years. The ministry, deprived of the chief warlock who had quietly steadied it for a generation, showed at once how little of its strength had ever been its own. Factions that had deferred to Dumbledore for 50 years discovered they no longer agreed on anything. The prophet ran the whole story now, the sealed will and the raised sacrifice and the stripped title, in headlines that grew each day, and the public that had loved the old man turned on him with the particular savagery of people who have discovered that a thing they trusted was more complicated than they wished it to be. And Lord Voldemort, watching from the dark with 3 anchors of his immortality gone and a wand he coveted changing hands, understood that the walls of Britain had just lost their keystone and moved to bring them down before anyone could set a new one. Harry gathered the people he had chosen in the ward heart under Grimmauld, where nothing could hear that he had not permitted to hear. Hermione, who held the map now and had cross-checked every anchor on it against a year of her own reading. Ron, who had arrived furious at being kept in the dark and had stayed once he understood the dark had been a kindness and a strategy both, and whose blunt loyalty was worth more than a dozen clever things. Snape, no longer anyone's instrument, standing at the edge of the runelight with his arms folded. Creature. Amelia Bones, who had come because Harry had asked, and because a director of magical law enforcement whose ministry was coming apart needed badly one place where the arithmetic was still honest. And Minerva McGonagall, who had walked out of the Order and into Harry's circle in the same night, because the splinter he had set in her in September had done its work and she had decided at last to trust her own bones. 3 anchors and the snake, Harry said, and drew the map out on the black stone in lines of light the ward heart lent him. A cup in a vault behind a dragon, which Gringotts will help me reach, because I am a client who does not lie to them, and Voldemort is a thief who once robbed them, and goblins have long memories and longer ledgers. A ring in the ruin of the house where he was born, which is guarded by a curse I now know the shape of, having watched a curse just like it eat the hand of the cleverest wizard in Britain. And the snake, which does not leave his side, which means the snake is the last thing to fall, and it falls at the end in front of him because there is no other way to reach it. He looked around the runelit circle at the faces that had come to him freely, not managed, not shaped, not spent. He's coming for the wand. He thinks it's the thing that will finally make him my equal, because he spent his whole life believing power is an object you acquire. He doesn't understand that the wand answered me because I beat the man who held it, and that I beat that man without a single curse in a chamber full of witnesses with a certified ledger and the truth laid year by year. That's the difference between us in the end. He collects instruments. I take apart the hand that holds them. He's going to come here expecting a duel over a stick, and he's going to find that I've already unmade 4 of his 7 souls, turned his enemy's greatest weapon, and gathered the only people in Britain who still trust each other into one room. He's the last piece on a board he thinks he's winning. And when he comes, McGonagall said in her hard, cold voice, what do you need from us, Potter? Because I did not leave one man's shadow to stand in another's. Tell me plainly, and I will decide plainly. Harry looked at her and understood the question under the question and answered the real one. I don't want your obedience, Professor, that's what he wanted. I want your judgment. When it starts, I'll tell each of you what I see and what I mean to do, and you'll tell me where I'm wrong, and you'll be able to because I'm going to give you the whole board and not a piece of it. That's the entire difference. That's what all of this was for. He let the map fade back into the stone. Get the cup, get the ring, keep the country from tearing itself apart while its keystone's gone, and when he marches on this island for the last time, be standing where you choose to stand, because I'd rather lose with people who chose than win with people I moved. Snape spoke then from the edge of the runelight for the first time that night. He will come to Hogwarts, he said, not because it is wise. Because it is where the old man's world had its heart, and he has spent his life measuring himself against that world, and now that it is falling he will want to be the one to bring the last stone down. He's not a strategist, whatever the fools who serve him believe. He is a wounded thing that has lost 5 pieces of itself in a season and cannot bear it, and a wounded thing runs to the place that hurt it most and tries to burn the place down. The black eyes moved to Harry. You have been 3 moves ahead of a genius all autumn. Do not make the error at the end of crediting the Dark Lord with the same subtlety. He's simpler than Albus, and simpler things are in some ways harder to trap because they do not think enough to walk into a clever snare. He will simply come with everything in fury at the place you least want him. Prepare for that, not for cunning, for a wound with an army. Harry inclined his head because it was true, and because a man who had spied on both immortals for half his life had earned the right to be heard on the subject of how they broke. Then we let him come to the place he can't resist, he said, and we make sure that when he gets there the place belongs to me. He did not explain what he meant. He was not certain yet that he could do the thing forming in the back of his mind, the thing about the castle and its thousand-year wards and a guardian who asked rather than seized. But he had learned to trust the sense of a large thing moving under still water, and it was moving now. They dispersed to their tasks, out of the ward heart into the shaking country, and Harry stood alone a moment in the steady deep glow with the elder wand in one hand and his own holly wand in the other, and felt the whole of the design he had spent a life inside finally entirely gone, and nothing in its place but the open, dangerous air of a future no one had arranged for him. Somewhere to the north, a snake coiled warm beside its master, and the master turned his ruined, eyeless attention toward a wand that had changed hands and began at last to move. Chapter 6 in Chapter 7, Burn It All Down. The cup came out of the ground the way the truth had come out of the will, quietly, and in a goblin's certified hand. Ragnarok did not ask why Harry wanted the little golden cup that sat in the deepest vault of the House of Lestrange, sealed behind a dragon and 100 cursed multiplying coins. Ragnarok had read the map in Harry's face across a desk once already and had chosen not to ask questions whose answers might oblige him to act. And so he had merely observed that the House of Lestrange had lodged a certain artifact for safe-keeping on the authority of a wizard who had in the last war robbed Gringotts itself, and that a bank which forgives a great many things does not forgive theft, and that the vaults keep long memories. The goblins brought the cup up out of the dark themselves, on the strength of a grievance 15 years old, and laid it before Harry in a lead casket without comment, and the note it sang was the note he had learned to hate. He destroyed it that night. There was no ceremony left in it. A fang, a scream, a pour of darkness, and the 5th of the 7 was gone, and Hermione crossed it off the map in her neat, exact hand, and neither of them said anything because the arithmetic spoke for itself. The ring was harder, and not because of the curse he had expected. He had watched a curse of exactly its kind spread up the arm of the cleverest wizard in Britain, and he had spent a week with the forbidden shelf learning the shape of the thing before he ever went near the ruined shack on the hill where Tom Riddle's mother had been born and abandoned. He went alone. He unwove the wards as he unwove everything now, patiently refusing to touch the ring itself until every trap around it had been read and answered. And when at last he lifted the cracked black stone and its ugly gold setting out of the rotten floorboards, the curse reached for him and found the discipline of a mind that had held a hurricane and let it go and could not take hold. It was the stone that nearly took him. He had known from the children's story what the ring's black stone was. The second Hal. The resurrection stone, that death had given the middle brother to call back the dead, and that had driven the middle brother to hang himself when he found the dead came back wrong, longing and cold and half in another world. Harry had told himself he would not turn it. He had told himself all the way up the hill. And then it was in his hand, warm where the ring was cold, humming with a pull older and gentler than any Horcrux, and it offered him, without a word, the one thing his whole cold, clean architecture had been built to do without. It offered him Sirius. He stood in the ruined shack with the stone in his palm and felt how easy it would be. 3 turns. His godfather's face, the last warm hand in England, back for as long as Harry cared to look. His parents, whom he had never known and would give a great deal to know. It offered them all, and it offered them softly, and Harry understood that this was the truest test he had faced since Ragnarok read him the will, because it was not an enemy's trap. It was a kindness, death itself, or a Peveril clever enough to wear the mask of death, offering him his dead and asking nothing in return but that he consent to want them. He did not turn the stone. He stood a long time with it warm in his hand, and he let himself want it fully, because he had learned that the way to refuse a thing is not to pretend you do not want it, but to want it with your eyes open and choose anyway. And then he understood the whole of what the stone was, and the understanding freed him. The stone did not bring the dead back. It brought back a longing wearing the dead's face, a hunger that would keep him standing on this hill in a ruined house talking to shadows until he was a shadow himself. It was the perfect distillation of everything Dumbledore had tried to make of him. A boy so starved of love that he would spend his whole life reaching toward the memory of a warm hand and never once live. Sirius had died so that Harry could live. To use the stone would be to undo that, to trade the living for the longing, to become the middle brother on the hill. No, Harry said aloud to the empty shack and the humming stone and whatever listened on the far side of it. You raised me on scraps to make me easy to lead by the heart. I'm not hungry anymore. Keep them, let them rest. The soul fragment was not in the stone. It was in the band, in the ugly gold that Tom Riddle had worn as a boy to remind a scornful world of the ancestry he had murdered his way toward. And Harry worked the black stone free of its cracked setting with the point of a fang, and then drove the fang home into the emptied gold. And the ring screamed its bell scream and poured out its darkness and died, the sixth of the seven unmade, and the resurrection stone rolled loose across the rotten boards, cold now, only a stone. He did not destroy the stone. It could not be destroyed by basilisk venom in any case, being a hallow and not a horcrux, and he found he did not wish to try. He set it down in the rotten floor of the shack where he had found it, and he left it there, because some power is best refused by being left exactly where it lies. And he walked back down the hill lighter than he had climbed it, and behind him the second hallow sat in the dark of a ruined house, declined, which is a thing almost no one in the long history of the world had ever managed to do. Only the snake remained now, and the snake did not leave its master's side, which meant the end had a shape at last, and the shape was a place, and the place, when Voldemort chose it, was the one Harry had known it would be. He came for Hogwarts on the first night of December, under a sky gone hard and starless with cold, and he came for it because it was the heart of the world Dumbledore had built, and because the wand he coveted had last been seen in a chamber in that world's ministry, and because a creature that has felt 5 of its 7 souls die in a single autumn needs, more than it needs strategy, to stand somewhere ancient and make it burn. Harry felt him coming as he felt everything now along the senses he had built, and he did not run to warn the school because the school had already been warned. He had spent November making certain of it. Amelia Bones held the grounds with the whole of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, because a director whose ministry was coming apart had decided that if the old order was going to fall, she would choose what it fell toward, and had chosen this. Minerva McGonagall held the castle, her students evacuated through passages Harry had mapped for her, the ones who were of age and had refused to leave a raid behind the professors who had taught them. The remnants of the fractured order had come, not because anyone had summoned them, but because a thing that had been held together by one man's secrets had discovered, in the man's absence, that it could hold itself together around something else, and the something else was standing at the gates in plain dark robes with 2 wands and no title at all. And they had come, the others, the ones the legend had drawn. All autumn the story of the hooded figure who fought like nothing the ministry taught and killed no one and left Death Eaters gift-wrapped in a burning square had spread through a frightened country. And such a country, having lost its faith in the old wise man, had gone looking for something to believe in, and had found, without quite knowing his name, a third power in the war who did not ask for their gratitude and did not ask for their obedience, and asked only that they stand where they chose to stand. They stood at Hogwarts not for Harry, for the choice he had shown them they were allowed to make. Harry walked the perimeter of the grounds an hour before Voldemort came alone, and he laid his hand against the outer wards where they ran along the ancient wall. And he did the thing he had learned in the ward heart under Grimmauld, only vast beyond any comparison, because the wards of Hogwarts were 1,000 years deep, and had been laid by 4 of the greatest magicians who ever lived, and had never in all that time had a master, only a headmaster, a keeper, a tenant like all the rest. The castle recognized him, it should not have. He was not its heir, not by any blood the founders had left. But he was the master of one hallow and the holder of another, and the heir of Peveril, and he came to the wards not to command them, but to offer himself to them as he had offered himself to the Black Ward Heart, a lord binding himself to a place, and the castle, which had waited 1,000 years for someone who would ask rather than presume, considered him in the cold and the dark and open. It opened the way the Ward Heart had opened, root feeding root, but on a scale that took the breath out of him and very nearly the self. The magic of the founders rose up through the ancient stone into the one mortal who had asked it properly in 1,000 years, and it lit him from below the floor of the world. And for one endless instant Harry held the whole of Hogwarts along his nerves as he held his own hand. Every stone and stair and secret passage, every ghost, every suit of armor, the lake and the forest's edge and the deep wards sunk into the bedrock, all of it his to feel and his to move. An ocean beside which the Black House had been a cup of water. The old dread pushed once against its door because a power like this did not want to be held, it wanted to hold, and Harry stood in the flood of it and did not let the door open because he had learned in a smaller room how to take an ocean and give it a form, and he gave this one the only form that would not drown him, not conquest, guardianship. He did not seize the castle. He agreed to defend it, and the castle, feeling the shape of the offer, poured itself into that shape and became, between one breath and the next, not his possession but his ally, which is a stronger thing and a rarer one. He took his hand from the wall. The grounds behind him were full of people who had chosen to stand there, and the sky ahead of him was beginning to boil with the black smoke of apparition as the Dark Lord's forces gathered at the edge of the wards, and Harry Potter stood between the two with 1,000 years of magic humming quiet in his bones and 2 wands in his hands and no leash on him anywhere in the world. "All right," he said to no one, to the cold, to the ancient waiting castle. "Let's put it down." Voldemort came through the failing edge of the outer wards like a wound opening in the night, and his army came with him, and the battle for Hogwarts began the way all such things begin, in noise and green light and the particular chaos that no plan survives. Harry did not fight it as a battle. He fought it as a lord defends his ground, which is to say he fought it with the ground itself. Where the Death Eaters pressed, the castle answered him, the stones rising, the stairs turning under attacking feet, the suits of armor waking from 1,000 years of sleep to close ranks in the courtyards, the very walls of Hogwarts bending the fight toward the defenders and away from the children who had not managed to flee. It was not subtle and it was not gentle, but it was precise, and precision was the thing that separated Harry from both of the men who had tried to build him. Voldemort's magic was a fist. Dumbledore's had been a scalpel wielded by a man who thought he was the only surgeon in the world. Harry's was neither. It was a door held open for the people he had chosen and closed against the people who had come to kill them, and it moved the way a mind moves everywhere at once ahead of the enemy's intent. He gave his allies the whole board as he had promised. Through the castle's wards he could feel every fight in every corridor, and he did not hoard the knowing. He sent it out, a word in Amelia's ear where the line was breaking. A warning to McGonagall of the flank coming through the greenhouse, a path open for the fractured order to fall back and reform, and each of them acted on their own judgment with the whole picture in their hands, and the defense of Hogwarts became the thing Dumbledore had never once allowed his people to be, a body of free minds moving together because they could all see, and not because one of them was pulling strings. It was a terrible and a beautiful thing, the castle at war under a master who had asked its leave. The great enchanted ceiling of the hall churned with the reflection of the fighting below, green light and gold, so that the defenders fought beneath a mirror of their own battle hung in a false and starless sky. In the courtyards, the statues that had stood 1,000 years came down from their plinths and moved with the slow granite certainty of things that had waited an age to be needed, and the walls themselves leaned their weight into the defense, corridors lengthening before an enemy's charge and shortening behind a friend's retreat, doors opening for the ones the castle had decided to love and sealing against the ones it had decided to refuse. Where the killing curses fell thickest, the ancient stone drank them and did not break. Where a child stumbled, a stair rose to catch her. The Founder's magic, roused for the first time in 1,000 years by a guardian who had offered rather than commanded, poured itself out in defense of the school its makers had built, and the sight of it was enough to make the oldest Death Eater in Voldemort's ranks understand too late that they had not attacked a building. They had attacked a living thing, and it had woken, and it knew them for what they were. Snape held the western stair alone for the length of the worst of it, and Harry felt him do it through the wards, felt the turned spy who had spent 16 years being no one's and everyone's fight at last for something he had chosen. He fought as he had done everything, without flourish, with a cold economy that turned aside 3 attackers at once and gave no ground, and when a 4th curse took him high in the shoulder and drove him to one knee, Harry felt that too and sent the castle to him, a wall risen at his back, a corridor closed to cut off the ones who would have finished him. Snape lived. Harry had decided weeks before in the Ward Heart that Severus Snape would not die in this war if there was any power in Harry's reach to prevent it, because the man had spent his whole life being spent by other people, and Harry was done letting people be spent. It was a small thing in the roar of a battle. It was also the whole of the difference between the guardian on the walls and the 2 men who had tried to build him, and Harry knew it, holding the wall at a wounded man's back while 1,000 years of magic answered his will. The snake fell in the Great Hall. Harry had known it would have to be there at the end near the Master, because Voldemort would not let the last anchor of his soul stray from his sight now that he could feel the others gone. He held Voldemort's attention himself, walking the length of the ruined hall toward the creature that had murdered his parents, drawing every particle of that ancient malice onto himself and away from the great pale serpent coiled at its master's side. And while the Dark Lord's whole burning attention was fixed on the young man walking toward him unafraid, it was Neville Longbottom, whose parents the design had also broken, who came out of the smoke with the sword of Gryffindor that the castle itself had given up to him in its hour of need, and took the serpent's head from its body in a single stroke, and the 7th and last of his hidden souls died screaming on the flagstones of the hall where Harry had eaten 1,000 ordinary breakfasts. And then it was only the 2 of them, Harry and the thing that called itself Lord Voldemort, in the wreck of the great hall under the enchanted ceiling that showed, indifferent, the hard starless winter sky. "You have been busy," Voldemort said in the high cold voice, and it was almost funny because it was nearly the same thing Dumbledore had said in the atrium, the two of them so certain they had understood him and so identically wrong. "The great families brought low, the old fool cast down. My own soul torn out of the world piece by a child I never troubled to fear. I will confess, Potter, that I did not see you. Neither of us saw you. We were too busy seeing each other." The red eyes glittered. "But you have made one mistake, and it is the mistake of the young, and it will be your last. You have gathered power you do not understand, the Elder Wand. It sings, boy, I can hear it from here. It should be mine. It was always going to be mine." "It was Dumbledore's," Harry said, and stopped, and did not raise the wand, and did not lower it either. "And I beat Dumbledore, not with a curse, with a ledger and a will and the truth in a room full of people he'd spent 50 years lying to. The wand felt it. Wands of that kind always do. It changed hands the night the Wisengamot cast him down, from him to me, because I defeated the man who held it. And a thing you have never once understood in your whole long deathless life is that power doesn't come from the object. It comes from the hand, and the hand comes from what the person is willing to do and to not do." He let that sit in the ruined hall. "You made yourself immortal by tearing your soul into 7 pieces so you'd never have to face the one thing you couldn't dominate. I made myself free by cutting one piece of you out of my own head with my eyes open. That's the whole difference between us, Tom. You spent your life running from death by making yourself less. I spent one autumn walking toward everything I was afraid of and coming out more. You're not going to beat me with a wand. You were never going to beat me with a wand. You lost the moment I stopped being afraid of the fire you were all so certain I'd walk into." Voldemort struck first because Voldemort always struck first, and the killing curse came across the great hall in a bar of green light with the whole of an immortal's hate behind it. And Harry did not dodge it, and he did not shield against it, because he had done the arithmetic on this in the ward heart weeks ago, and he trusted the arithmetic over his own flinch. He raised the Elder Wand, the wand that had been Dumbledore's and was now his by right of a bloodless conquest, the most powerful wand that had ever existed, and it knew its master, and it would not be turned against him. The green light met a wall of pale fire that came up out of the ancient stone at Harry's silent asking, the castle answering its guardian, and the killing curse broke against the Founder's magic like surf against rock, and rebounded, and the thing that had made itself deathless by murdering its way to 7 souls met the last of its own hate coming back the other way with nothing left to catch it. No anchor, no vessel, no piece of itself hidden in a locket or a cup or a diadem or a snake or a boy. Only the one frayed remnant of a soul it had spent so recklessly, and it had nowhere left to flee. Tom Riddle died the way any man dies, which he had spent his whole life refusing to believe he was, and his body fell in the wreck of the great hall and did not rise, and the last shred of soul that had kept him in the world went out like a blown candle, and the war that 2 old men had spent Harry's whole life fighting through him was, in the space of a single rebounded curse, simply over. The hall was silent. Then it was not, because a battle does not know at once that it has ended, and the noise of it went on in the far corridors for a while yet before the news outran the fighting, and the last of the Dark Lord's forces understood that the thing they had feared into obedience was a corpse on a stone floor, and broke and ran or laid down their wands. Harry stood over the body of the man who had murdered his parents and felt no triumph, and examined the absence of it and understood it as he had understood the same absence in the Wisengamot. You do not triumph over the fall of a great and terrible thing. You only make sure it falls the right way, and then you stand in the wreckage and get to work. He found Dumbledore in the entrance hall, sitting on the great stone steps with his back against the wall, and the ruin had reached his heart at last. The old man had come to Hogwarts to die. Harry understood it at once, seeing him there. He had not come to command, there was no one left who would take his commands. He had come because it was the place he had loved longest, and because a man who feels the curse reaching his heart wants to be somewhere that knew him young, and because Harry thought some part of him had wanted to see how the story ended even though he was no longer allowed to write it. "He's dead," Harry said, sitting down on the cold step beside the dying man, because there was no reason left not to. "Riddle, it's finished. The snake's gone, the last piece is gone, and he threw a killing curse at me and the wand wouldn't turn on its master and the castle sent it back. He's a body on the floor of the great hall, that's all he ever was underneath. A body that was so afraid of being a body that it tore itself into 7 pieces to pretend otherwise." Dumbledore was quiet for a while. His breath came slow and shallow, and the blackness had climbed his throat now, and his hands lay still in his lap, and his pale eyes rested on the great doors of the school he had ruled for a generation. "You did it without dying," he said at last. "You did it without the sacrifice. Everything I built, every cruelty, the cupboard and the closed doors and the whole patient machine, all of it aimed at a death that you have just proven was never necessary. It was not a question, and there was no self-pity in it, only a terrible, clear-eyed accounting, the ledger of a life laid year by year at the very end. I have spent 16 years certain there was no other way, and the certainty was the whole of my sin, not the cruelty. A man can be forgiven cruelty done in a true necessity. The sin was that I never once checked whether the necessity was true, because checking would have meant admitting that a solution might exist which I had not found, and I could not admit that because being the one who found the solutions was the only way I had ever learned to be safe in a world I could not trust." His breath rattled. "Aberforth was right, he was always right. I heard it as bitterness for 50 years because hearing it as truth would have cost me everything. It cost me everything anyway. It only took longer, and a child had to grow up in a cupboard for it. Yes, Harry said. He did not soften it. He had never softened anything for this man, and he was not going to start at the end because softening it would be a lie, and he had promised himself he was done trading in the old man's currency. It did. All of that is true, and none of it is forgiven, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's all right because it isn't, and you'd know I was lying, and we've had enough lying between us to last both our lives. He looked out at the doors with the old man. But I'll tell you the one true thing I have for you because you gave me one true thing at the end in the atrium, and a fair dealing deserves a fair return. You were wrong that the sacrifice was necessary. But you weren't wrong that the war had to be won, or that the pieces had to be found, or that someone had to be willing to do the hard, cold things to end it. You were just wrong that it had to be you alone, holding every string, deciding for everyone. It didn't have to be one man. It turned out it could be a room full of people who trusted each other, handed the truth, and left to choose. That's the thing you never tried in 50 years. You never once tried simply trusting people with the whole of it. I tried it, it worked. Take that with you if you want something to take. The world you couldn't save by holding it, other people saved by sharing it. That's not a defeat, that's just a different answer than the one you spent your life defending. You can rest on it if you'll let yourself. Albus Dumbledore turned his head and looked at the young man his design had meant to make into a weapon and had instead made into something he had never in his long life managed to be, and the pale eyes were wet, and there was in them at the very end the thing Harry had seen in the atrium and had not been able to name, and could name now because it was the same thing he felt himself, sitting on a cold step beside a dying enemy with the war finally over. It was peace. The old man had spent a lifetime unable to put anything down, and someone had finally shown him how, and it had cost him the whole of his self-regard, and he found at the last that he did not miss it. Thank you, Dumbledore said very quietly, and it was the first entirely honest thing he had ever said to Harry, unarranged, unweighted, asking for nothing. For not hating me and for not sparing me. They are difficult to do at once. You have done them both all autumn. His breath slowed. His eyes went back to the great doors in the winter beyond them. Burn it down, Harry, he murmured, and there was the ghost of something almost like humor in it. The order I built, it was rotten at the root, and I was the root. Burn it all down and build something no single man can hold. You are the only one I have ever met who might manage it without wanting to sit on the throne when the burning's done. Do not want the throne. Promise an old man that. Not the leash, not the throne, something else. Something new? I don't want the throne, Harry said. I've had a throne pointed at the back of my head my whole life. I know exactly what they're worth. And Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, the man who had held all the strings, let go of the last of them and died on the steps of the school he had loved, looking at the doors with a young man he had wronged and been forgiven by sitting quiet beside him in the cold. Dawn came gray and cold over a castle that had held. Harry walked back through it as the fighting guttered out, through corridors where the statues were settling back onto their plinths with the ponderous dignity of things returning to a long sleep, past the wounded being tended and the dead being covered, and the living standing in the stunned quiet that comes after a thing everyone expected to lose. They looked at him as he passed, all of them, and he made himself meet the looking because he had learned that a person who will not be seen after a battle is a person building the next lie, and he was done with lies. They did not cheer him. It was not that kind of morning, and he was glad of it. They only looked and inclined their heads and went back to their wounded and their dead, and Harry understood that this was what victory actually was, not the roar of a crowd but the quiet nod of people who had chosen to stand and had not been made to. He found the ones he had gathered in the great hall as the false ceiling cleared to show a real and ordinary sunrise. Hermione, gray with exhaustion, already looking at him with the next question forming. Ron beside her, bloodied and whole and grinning the tired grin of someone who has survived something he expected to die in. Snape, his shoulder bound, upright against a pillar, watching Harry across the hall with the black eyes that had stopped, somewhere in the night, being anyone's instrument at all. McGonagall and Amelia Bones with her monocle cracked and her jaw set, and Neville with the sword of Gryffindor still bare in his hand and the blood of a great serpent drying on the blade, and Creature who had fought in the kitchens with the fury of a house defending its own and would tell the story to Regulus's memory for the rest of his long life. None of them had been managed. None of them had been shaped. None of them had been spent. They had come because Harry had given them the whole of the truth and left them free to choose, and they had chosen and they had won. And they stood now in the ruin of the great hall as the first honest sunrise in 100 years came through the high windows, a circle of people who trusted each other because no one among them had ever lied to hold the rest. It's done, Harry said, and it was the third time he had said those words that night, to an elf and to a dying man and now to the people he had chosen, and each time it had meant something larger, and this time it meant all of it. It's done. They did not build a new order that winter. Harry made certain of that because a thing built in the flush of victory is only the old thing wearing a new face, and he had burned down one machine and had no intention of assembling another while the ashes were still warm. He gave the Elder Wand no more work to do. He did not break it because breaking a thing is its own kind of grand gesture, and he had grown suspicious of grand gestures, but he sealed it in the deepest vault the goblins kept, under wards keyed to a lock that would open for no living hand, including his own, so that the most powerful wand in the world would simply wait in the dark, mastered and unused, until its master died undefeated in his bed one distant day and its power broke quietly with him. Which was the ending Dumbledore had wanted and had been too much himself to achieve. Harry could achieve it because he did not want the wand, and wanting nothing he found was the only safe way to hold everything. The Wisengamot leaderless came to him. Of course it came to him, a body that has just cast down one keeper goes looking at once for another, because 500 years of habit does not die because one man did. They offered him the chief warlockship. They offered it with relief, with something close to hunger, a whole chamber of powerful people desperate to hand their judgment back to someone so they would not have to keep the frightening business of using their own. Harry stood in the well of the chamber where he had cast down the old man, and he looked at the seats rising in their tears at the fear behind the offer, at the leash they were trying so earnestly to fasten around their own necks and hand him the end of, and he refused it. He refused it in the plainest words he had. He told them that the office itself was the rot, that no chamber should ever again let one hand hold what that office held, that the answer to a bad king is not a good king but a room that has learned to govern itself, and that he would take no title and hold no seat but the four that were his by blood and would vote them as one voice among 50, and that if they wanted his help dismantling the office of chief warlock into something no single person could ever fill again, he would give it gladly. And that this was the only help he would give, and they could take it or keep looking for a new man to blame and thank and follow into the next disaster. It was not what they wanted. It was the opposite of what they wanted. But he had learned from the one man who had ever truly beaten anyone in that chamber that the brave, unglamorous arithmetic works both ways, and that a room that has just watched a young lord refuse the crown will find, in ones and twos and then in a rush, that it is a shame to keep offering it. They dismantled the office over the following year. It was slow and it was ugly and it was full of the ordinary graceless compromises of people learning to carry a weight they had spent their lives handing to someone else. And Harry watched it with a satisfaction deeper than any duel had ever given him, because this was the real burning, the one Dumbledore had named on the steps, the slow dismantling of the machine that had made a whole world dependent on one man's wisdom, and the building in its place of something clumsier and freer and far harder to seize. He spent his 4 votes on the things the old order had buried. He laid the certified voting ledger before the reforming Wisengamot year beside year and let them see for themselves what 50 years of one hand had done, and then he used the weight of the ancient houses of Potter and Black to begin unmaking it, one struck law at a time. The registry of proscribed arts was gutted, its 5 expansions repealed. The old blood-anchored magics in the mind arts returned to the light where a person might learn to defend their own thoughts and their own ground without a license from a committee. The emergency powers voted to the chief warlock in the last war and never rescinded were rescinded at last. And the creature laws, the slow, patient legislation that had pressed the goblins and the werewolves and the house elves, each a little further down every decade for their own protection, Harry took apart with a particular cold pleasure, because he had learned who his true allies were, and none of them had been human. Ragnarok watched a Potter stand in the Wisengamot and argue that a people who keep the nation's gold and its oldest oaths might be trusted to keep its laws as equals, and marked it, as goblins mark everything, in a ledger that would outlast them both. Remus Lupin lived to see the law that had made him unemployable struck from the books by the son of the man he had loved. And Creature, who had served a great and terrible house through its long fall into cowardice, lived to see his master remake the world so that the next elf lent to a dark lord for an hour might have somewhere to turn that was not a cave and a basin and a lonely death. It was not charity. Harry had no use for charity, which was only another way of keeping people small. It was the plain recognition that a world in which one kind of being holds every string is the exact world he had spent a year burning down, whether the hand on the strings belonged to a dark lord or to a good man certain of his own wisdom, and that the burning meant nothing if he only rebuilt it with the pieces rearranged. He was 17 still that first winter, and then he was 18 and the war was over, and both the old men who had spent his life trying to hold him were in the ground, and the leash they had between them fastened on him before he could speak had rotted away entirely, on a schedule of his own setting. He walked out of the ministry on the last day of the hearings that broke the office of Chief Warlock forever, into a cold, clear London afternoon, with no title and no leash and no design left running under his life anywhere in the world, and he stood on the steps a moment and let the whole vast quiet of it settle over him, the silence in his own skull that he had first heard on the night of the excision and had never once stopped being grateful for. Creature was waiting with the carriage. Hermione was somewhere inside, already 3 moves into whatever came next, because minds like hers did not rest and he would not have wanted her to. There were people who trusted him and whom he trusted freely with their eyes open, none of them managed, none of them shaped, none of them spent. And ahead of him was a future that no one had arranged, dangerous and open and entirely his to walk into on his own 2 feet. He went down the steps into the cold and did not look back, because the thing behind him was finished and the thing ahead of him was only beginning, and for the first time in the whole of his remembered life the difference between the two was a choice that belonged to him alone. Chapter 7 End.